direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This Honorable House, call to resume. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter? Yes. Mr. Samuda? Mr. Olness? Dr. Clark? Mr. Shaw? Dr. Chang? Mr. Montague? Ms. Grange? Mr. Henry? Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Mackenzie? Mr. Chuck? Mr. Vaz? Mr. Warmington? Mrs. Robinson? Mr. Hutchinson? Dr. Tufton? Mrs. Williams? Mrs. Malahuford? Mr. Spencer? Mr. Green? Mr. Terrelong? Mr. Main? Mr. Arscott? Mr. Azan? Mr. Brown? Dr. Brownberg? Mr. Buchanan? Mr. Bunting? Dr. Campbell? Mr. Campbell? Mr. Clark? Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn? Miss Daly? Mr. Daly? Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert? Dr. Dunn? Mr. Fagan? Dr. Ferguson? Mr. Golding? Dr. Guy? Miss Hannah? Mr. Hales? Mrs. Holness? Mr. Hilton? Mr. Jackson? Mr. Kelly? Dr. McNeil? Miss Nita? Mr. Paulwell? Mr. Phillips? Dr. Phillips? Mr. Pickersgill? Mr. Redman? Mr. Robertson? Mr. Robinson? Mr. Robinson? Okay. Mr. Stewart? Reverend Thwaites? Mrs. Vaz? Mrs. Vaz? Mr. Dwayne Vaz? Dr. Wheatley? And Mr. Wright? Mr. Darrell Vaz? He's no longer honored with that title.
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, you know, it has just occurred to me that when we have speeches given by ministers in the sectoral debate, they're really responding to item 9, where it reads, be it resolved that this Honourable House of Representatives approve the plans and program being pursued by the government in respect of ministries which were not included in the debate of the appropriations bill, and further approve the policy projections as announced for the financial year 2019-2020. So at the completion, Minister, you will set the example today. At the completion of your presentation, you will affirm your support for the plans and policies going forward of the government of Jamaica. I just want you to understand that, and then it will be closed under that item. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we will have today a statement by the Minister of Health when he arrives, but notwithstanding his absence, he would still have to await the presentation of the members who are identified to speak today. That is the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, and the member. Oh, I thought you were talking to me. And the member from Central Kingston, who will also be making his contribution. So, Mr. Speaker, that is how we will proceed today. And we are expecting the Minister of Health, when he arrives, to make his contribution at the completion of both presentations.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are copies of Ministry Paper number 20 of 2019 entitled Performance Report 2018-2019 of the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, and the annual report and audited financial statement of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company Limited for the year 2016-2017.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Whereas Section 1G1 of Section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica requires a member of this Honourable House of Representatives to vacate his seat if any firm in which he is a partner or any company of which he is a director or manager becomes a party to any contract with the government of Jamaica for or on account of the public service, or if he becomes a partner in a firm or a director or manager of a company which is a party to any such contract. And whereas the Member of Parliament for St. Mary South East is a director of Norlando Jamaica Limited, Supermed Limited, and Indies Pharma Jamaica Limited. And these companies may from time to time enter into contracts with the government of Jamaica and its agencies. And whereas the member has disclosed his interest in this company, it is resolved that this motion be referred to the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me. No, at public business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, at the end of 21 days, I beg to ask the Minister of Energy the following questions.
Mr. Speaker, I just inquire from the House Leader. Last week, the Prime Minister had indicated he would answer my questions.
Motions that may be made.
Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd just like to inquire from the House Leader whether later in the proceedings we will get to the questions that the Prime Minister had indicated last week that he would intended to answer today. I don't know if his travel plans have kept him away or whether he will be coming later and there'll be a recommittal of this item further on down in the evening.
I will communicate to the Prime Minister prior to his arrival. I'm expecting him here today, and hopefully he'll be in a position to respond, but I will let you know as soon as I get that information.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Members, I wish to bring to your attention that we have a number of visitors with us today, diplomats, other officials, families of those members who are going to speak, and other officials. Will you welcome them for me, please? Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mr. Sebudo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to call on the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, Fisheries, Investment, agricultural investment, any other thing that you may wish to add. I ask that you invite him to make his presentation in this sectoral debate.
Minister Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, I first of all would like to welcome our visitors in the gallery, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and a number of our government agencies that are represented here as well. Some members of my constituency have not arrived yet, but I want to acknowledge them. And my daughters, two of my daughters are here. A doctor and the director of a company, right? My wife and our little 10-year-old daughter are unavoidably absent overseas. So we offer their apologies. Well, Mr. Speaker, I had the very great privilege and honor during last year's budget, I think perhaps having set a record of speaking 3 times, because I opened and closed the debate of the budget, and then I opened and closed. So it's really 4 times. It's not 3 speeches. It was 4 speeches last year. Happily, it's reduced to 1 this year. And I want to, having served now for a year as minister in this new portfolio, I sometimes have thoughts as to whether I should thank the Prime Minister for having put me in this position, because I can assure you it's been a very challenging role. But it is my honor, Prime Minister, to continue to serve, and that it's rooted in the fact that I'm a member of a team and an administration that is growing the economy, creating a new Jamaica, and increasing the prosperity of our people. I'm proud and honored also to represent over 230,000, I think approaching 240,000 small farmers in this country, the over 20,000 fisher folk, thousands of entrepreneurs in the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, as well as our large business enterprises, our manufacturers, exporters, traders, and investors that keep Jamaica growing. Mr. Speaker, the role of government in engendering growth and prosperity is crystal clear. And so my ministry, and I won't keep repeating it because it's too long, it's going to take up too much time, under our watch and in collaboration with my colleague ministers, Hutchinson and Green, along with the dedicated members of staff, led by the Permanent Secretary, will continue under this administration to create the enabling environment for individuals and businesses to thrive and create wealth for themselves, their families, communities, and their country. Mr. Speaker, I'm buoyed today by the fact that Jamaica has been hailed as the best country to do business in the Caribbean for the 4th consecutive year and 10th in the Latin American region, according to Forbes magazine. The home of the world's best performing stock market, according to Bloomberg. And the 6th easiest country in which to start a business, according to Doing Business Report. Mr. Speaker, the expansion of our economy is palpable. My script says you can almost feel. I've taken out the word almost. You can feel it. We have attained macroeconomic stability with incrementally improving levels of gross domestic product, even while several fledgling industries find their footing and inspire further growth in the economy. I can boldly attest to the fact that Jamaica is on a path of economic growth and has been so for the last few years. Signal, look at what has happened, the unprecedented decline in the unemployment rate from 13.2% when we took over as government, and it is now at a record low of 8%, Mr. Speaker. 8%. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I can say without any fear of contradiction that working closely with my colleagues, especially at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, led by the Most Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, we are on the road to greater prosperity. There ain't no stopping us now, and there will be no turning back. We intend to grow our industries, the agricultural industry, the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, the manufacturing and services sectors. We all know the journey along the road to prosperity is not without its challenges. It's not an easy road. It is one that requires commitment, hard work, and resilience. And it requires the kind of resilience that defines the character of the Jamaican farmer, for instance. Whether he works his banana walk in the cool hills of Portland, his vegetable plot on the dry plains of St. Elizabeth, or the potato and yam fields of Manchester and Trelawney. This resilience, Mr. Speaker, finds fodder and nurture in the creative will of our small businesses, business owners, and entrepreneurs. For the calendar year 2018, preliminary estimates from Statin show that the quantity of food imported declined by 5.1% when compared with food imports in 2017. That's a good sign. Good sign. There was a decline in the imports. It cannot be lost on us that overall growth for the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry stood at 4.2%, while contributing approximately 7.2% to the gross domestic product. Domestic crop production rebounded with a growth of 7.2% when compared with the previous year, Mr. Speaker. There was an overall growth rate of 0.2%, modest as it is in the manufacturing sector. An increase which was based the previous year was a negative growth, primarily on the food and beverages sub-industries. This sends a clear message to us of the very serious linkage between agriculture and industry and the need to further develop the value chain. In fact, I'm going to be spending some time on this issue because I think it is important that we concentrate on the vision that the Prime Minister had when he established the merger of industry with agriculture. There is a natural linkage, and what we have to do is to make sure that that linkage in a real and practical way becomes manifested. Mr. Speaker, in every challenge there is a seed of opportunity, and agriculture is the seed to Jamaica's economic prosperity. In addition to the agriculture sector, in this portfolio, for the main productive sectors of the economy, we have the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, Fisheries. We also have portfolio responsibility for the main productive sectors of the economy. We take this very seriously, Mr. Speaker, bearing in mind that these goods-producing sectors account for some 45% of the labor force, while contributing over 33% to our annual gross domestic product. We are aligned, umbilically aligned, Mr. Speaker, to the country's growth agenda and the national growth inducement strategy. So even as we assess the achievements of the past, we are focused on the future. We are focused on inducing growth. We are bent on attracting more and more investment, and we shall be moving and are moving forward with prosperity. Let's talk a little bit about investment. Our lead investment and promotions agency, JAMPRO, reports that preliminary data show that in fiscal year 18-19, the value of local and foreign direct investments by their clients was US $545 million. The number of jobs created by JAMPRO clients was 14,000, exceeding the target of 14,401, exceeding the target of 14,156. The value of export shipments by JAMPRO clients was US $762 million, some 43% above the target, Mr. Speaker. In this fiscal year, JAMPRO will continue to connect both local and international private sector members to opportunities in the economy, in the mining and quarrying, energy, manufacturing, business process outsourcing, and the hospitality sectors. And I wish to join today in offering our congratulations to the success stories in several of these industries, with, of course, tourism being the poster child. And I wonder what award the minister got last week. Mr. Speaker, in the 2018-19 fiscal year, the Export-Import Bank disbursed some $9.4 billion to the productive sector, 72% of which went towards providing financing to the medium, small, and micro enterprise sector, its highest ever contribution to the growth and development of small and medium enterprises in Jamaica. This fiscal year, an additional $400 million has been committed by the bank for investment in the sector, and this is growth-inducing investment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Exim Bank is projecting to provide in excess of $9.4 billion in credit this fiscal year, but is hopeful of being able to increase this target with increased capital injections to facilitate export growth for new and existing clients. And I wish to take note of the innovative program whereby the Tourism Enhancement Fund has provided funds for the tourism sector on lend through the Exim Bank at the reasonable interest rate of 4%. 4% interest rate. Mr. Speaker, our partners in the private sector and stakeholders in the private sector are also to be commended, some of whom are here with us today, and I welcome you. They are using more local produce in baking and brewing, expanding the export of fresh produce and manufactured goods, and continue to grow their businesses by investing in Jamaica. The role of the financial sector in lowering interest rates and making loans more accessible must also be commended, Mr. Speaker. Even as we recognize, welcome, and encourage the invaluable participation and investment of the private sector in growing the economy, we are gathered in this assembly to also review and underscore our own role and leadership as government. We have not only planned but intend to implement these plans and to work for Jamaica. That is why, for the fiscal year ahead, the Ministry will anchor our growth initiatives in several main policy priorities. And I wish to highlight some of these in this Honourable House today. 1. Optimizing the production and productivity of key local produce and products towards targeted markets in order to increase agricultural production and productivity. Achieve food security while increasing access to financing and employ appropriate technology and infrastructure development. 2. We plan to work for Jamaica by increasing the access of select local industries to emerging and existing markets. We simply have to strengthen the marketing linkages and opportunities available to us locally, regionally, and internationally. And I'm going to get back to that, a major point. 3, the Ministry intends to work by strengthening the contribution of the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to the economy. And in this regard, our goal is to improve the business environment regarding starting a business, business formalization, accessing credit, and resolving insolvency. And I want to make the point here. Accessing credit is a very critical point. But I want businesses to know, I want small business persons to know that when you begin to access credit and access credit at low interest rates, there is a quid pro quo. You are getting greater access, but out of that you must have greater transparency and formalize your business, have a proper business plan so you know where you're going, because if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there. So we want to get our businesses who want money not at 30% interest rate anymore, not at 40% interest rate anymore. We want it to get into the culture of single-digit interest rates for people who are serious about business. Serious about business. And I want to say it here now because my staff has given me a 2-hour speech to be delivered in 1 hour. Right? Yes. So I'm going to have to mention some things now that might be further in the text, but I'm just going to mention it now because it is in the appropriate context. And one of them is this. I've spoken with the Minister of Finance. We have formally initiated a study into the use of dormant funds in this country. Why is that so? It's taking us 15 years before dormant funds are returned to the central government. 15 years. What is the world average, Mr. Speaker? 7 years. In the United States, it is 5 years. Right? But you know what happens when it stays in that account for 15 years, right? Right? You know what happens. It's depleted continually, all right? But we have initiated a study. The first report is coming out next week, and within 2 months we'll have a final report to present to the Minister of Finance, because if we are able to bring dormant funds down to the world average of 7 years, it will open up billions of dollars that will be need to be made available to our small, medium enterprises for loans for to business. So, Mr. Speaker, number 4 on our priority list is to build on our great tradition of human resilience and apply that commitment and strength to building climate-resilient agriculture, fisheries, manufacturing and services, especially to develop and adopt climate-resilient practices among targeted farming and fishing communities in Jamaica. And our 5th priority is therefore to continually improve the ease of doing business to facilitate investment in Jamaica. We cannot make it a difficult task to invest in Jamaica. It can be a laborious task. We need to make it a happy task. When people want to become entrepreneurs, we must drive them and encourage them. And we shouldn't be taking steps to militate against that. Mr. Speaker, in terms of trade facilitation, this program seeks to implement trade reforms while simultaneously ensuring that appropriate trade policy prescriptions are in place to preserve the livelihood of our stakeholders and to ensure the nation's food safety and security. So we have a facilitation program, Mr. Speaker, that works hand in hand with the investment promotion program, which seeks to ensure that Jamaica's business environment supports the increase in foreign direct investments, local direct investment, local jobs, and of course, businesses. So we are improving transparency and predictability in the trading environment and enhancing the country's trade support services. Of importance, I want to make this point. Through the Trade Facilitation Task Force, headed by former head of JAMPRO, Patricia Francis, their efforts to gradually reduce the unnecessary and burdensome red tape associated with regulatory compliance in the trading environment. My ministry has received the green light from the Cabinet for the removal of some specific permits that are no longer required, licenses, and even charges. Some charges that are no longer necessary at the Trade Board and other institutes will be removed. You cannot just be adding on charges like that to the private sector every day. Where the charges are no longer appropriate, they are going to be removed, period. So, Mr. Speaker, while this is being done within the context of Jamaica's commitment under the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement to reduce the time and cost to trade and create a more agile business and trading environment, the benefits that will be derived from the removal of these irrelevant permit applications positions our investors and producers on the tarmac for takeoff. And Mr. Speaker, and complements well our other initiatives such as the Jamaica Trade Information Portal and the Single Window Facilities. What is the Trade Information Portal, Mr. Speaker? I'm pleased today to announce officially in this House that on Thursday, the 16th of May, we will launch the Jamaica Trade Information Portal formally. This portal, the first of its kind in the English-speaking Caribbean, will literally provide all trade information for importers and exporters at their fingertips. This trade information portal will provide access to such information as the laws, processes, requirements for trade. The trade information portal has a rich database including standards, procedures, tariff, fees, taxes, levies, and applicable penalties, various authorizations, inspections, and verifications, Mr. Speaker. This will be managed by the Trade Board and will complement the other pillars in the modern infrastructure to facilitate and boost trade. These other pillars are the Single Window Facility, our border regulatory agencies, and the Asecuda system that is now being managed by the Jamaica Customs Department. So this portal will provide the responsiveness and agility our producers and service providers need to become more competitive in the global market, Mr. Speaker. And this is also about making it easier to do business in Jamaica. Now, I promised I would spend a little time on agriculture. Very important. Agriculture is at the base of our plan to create prosperity in this country, and we cannot give it any lip service and any short treatment. The ministry is pleased to share with you, the members of the House, a small gift basket, by the way, showcasing some of our locally produced crops and value-added products. And we have other items on display outside the foyer, and I invite members to take a look on your way out. But we do this because it is so important to reinforce the message of the critical role that agriculture and fisheries, along with the agro-industrial sector, play in our economy. We do it also to help us reflect upon and salute the hard work of our farmers and our entrepreneurs. Without them, growth and expansion would not be possible. When you look at the displays of processed foods out there, very exciting. When you go to the expo shows and you see the innovation, the spirit of initiative and enterprise that is being displayed by our young people, many of them coming out of university, and they want to go into the factory to produce things using locally produced raw materials. Truly exciting. So, Mr. Speaker, in this program of building out agriculture, one of the big issues that comes out in a very profound way is the question of land utilization. Land utilization. There are thousands of acres of idle government lands across this island. Time has come to revolutionize, expand, and modernize the use of these lands. And so we are stratifying the use of available lands. The acreage of lands managed by the Sugar Company Holdings of Jamaica alone is some 120,000 acres. Of this amount, 55,000 acres are being retained in sugar, while 65,000 acres are being redirected into other crops, and in some limited cases into some housing solutions as well. Yes, we still need housing. Oh yeah, people need housing. People need decent housing too. Not squatting all over the place. So we have to provide some land for decent housing as well. So the SCJ, the Sugar Company I'm coming to Burnham Lodge. I'll be answering you. It's in my script. I'm coming to it. Okay? Mr. Speaker? How much time you need from government? You don't do one thing yet. Hold on. All right, okay. All right, okay. Time out. My time is moving. Mr. Speaker, let's recall that the Sugar Company Holdings was established in 2008 under the sugar privatization policy to manage government's sugar lands. Mr. Speaker, hold on now. All right, I come to Bernard Lodge now. Can I talk about Bernard Lodge now, please? Okay. All right. Good. Mr. Speaker, let me say first of all that the Sugar Company Holdings of Jamaica has had extensive consultations with the farmers in the Bernard Lodge area. I am telling you that. The Sugar Company Holdings of Jamaica has had extensive consultations with them. I am telling you that. Now, critical to this objective, Mr. Speaker, is the Bernard Lodge lands under the Bernard Lodge Development Plan, which have now been earmarked and are already being used for increased economic activity, including the production of crops such as cassava for industrial use, vegetables for domestic consumption, housing development, small business enterprises, agro-processing, small manufacturing projects, and quarrying, just to name a few. As we continue to build a new town and expand the urban landscape along the East-West Highway 2000 corridor. Further, along that corridor, more lands have come into government's land bank, with the return of over 44,000 acres by the Pan-Caribbean Sugar Company of Jamaica. I want to make it very clear that in the consultations we have had, we have given the undertaking to the farmers that wherever farmers have to be relocated, they are going to be given equally productive land, and adequate irrigation will be put in place and infrastructure for them as well. So, Mr. Speaker, we realize that some of the bleatings that we are hearing now is more out of political opportunity rather than anything else. We cannot develop into a modern, decent, civilized society unless we are going to use the God-given assets that we have in a judicious way. And we must make decent housing available to the people of Jamaica, period. And there should be no argument about that whatsoever. This government is therefore committed that we are going to have a judicious... I'll give you one of the examples, by the way. One of the examples of one of the investors in Bernard Lodge that will be doing agro-processing. They will also be providing some of those lands to work in contract arrangement with small farmers to produce. And the agro-processing center will be there to process what they produce. It's going to be better days for a lot of farmers who will have guaranteed that what they produce, they will be selling. So, Mr. Speaker, as we ramp up the utilization of idle lands, I can report to this House today that as of July 2018, we have received over 300 applications for the lease of sugar company holding lands. These are for various sizes, from small farmers to large enterprises, some of which are eligible for entering into mother farm and satellite farm relationships. Mr. Speaker, we have applications with technology. Of course. In one case, Mr. Speaker, one of the investments, which will be over 2,000 acres of land, is going to involve technology that we bring in from Israel. Absolutely. I went to Israel a few months ago, a country surrounded by deserts and enemies, and they have to extract the salt from seawater to irrigate their lands because they don't have the natural assets of rainfall and other things that we have here. But when you drive out of the airport, you look to the right, you look to the left, orchards, mango orchards, citrus orchards. The hills are manicured with agricultural productivity. And what we have down here, idle lands and idle hands, can't work. Cannot work anymore. And Mr. Speaker, if I might be so bold enough to suggest to my colleague from St. Catherine that this is not a time now when we are talking about how we're going to rationalize lands, get lands into production. Let's not be quarreling about one little bumper land over here, so, and over there, so. Let's look at the big picture. Let us look at the big picture. But I understand your political motivation, my friend. Mr. Speaker, the businesses to be established in the Bernard Lodge area alone, Mr. Speaker, you know how much the value of the business is? $58 billion of businesses that will be set up at Bernard Lodge. So, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the restructuring of sugar lands, we have been in touch with the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and the Ministry of Transport and Mining to systematically identify the availability of arable lands at the National Land Agency. It's not just sugar company lands, folks. You guys listen to me, okay? Don't listen to him. Listen to me. All right? Right? So it's not just sugar company lands we're going to rationalize. National Land Agency has land too. Okay? And the Ministry of Transport and Mining, right? They have lands. The National Land Utilization Commission under NEPA and the Bauxite Institute with mined out, reclaim the bauxite land. I want the inventory of all of them. We're going to put them into production. And I want to use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to invite private citizens who are holders of idle lands. Join us in the revolution to use these lands or lease these lands for use in the agricultural sector. Mr. Speaker, let me just say, I mentioned mangoes earlier, and I'm very pleased to advise that under the mango irradiation program, Jamaica will send its first shipment of mangoes to the United States in May of this year when the mango season formally begins. We're going to export mangoes to the United States. Yes. Dam Rep mango, Mexico mango, look out, real mangoes are on their way. And the ministry will provide assistance by waiving the fees associated with inspection, storage and usage of the plant quarantine produce inspection facilities for the 1-year period, this year to May of next year. Only approved mango exporters to the USA will be eligible for this waiver at an estimated value of $1 million per exporter for the year. 3 farms have already been approved, and 12 more are on their way to being approved. The best and the sweetest mangoes are on their way to the U.S. market after being absent for almost 20 years. Mr. Speaker, it is not only mangoes that will be growing. It will be recalled that I announced a 5 million fruit tree planting program when I spoke last year. While we are exploring grant funding, including the United Nations Green Climate Fund, the UN Green Climate Fund, to boost the program, in this financial year we'll be establishing a fruit trees program unit to initiate the work. The unit will be staffed by RADA, the Research and Development Division of the Ministry, and the 4-H clubs. This is a very important program during the launch exercise. I'll hear more about it when I launch the exercise very soon. Mr. Speaker, in addition to leasing lands to investors, we are providing support for our farmers in expanding irrigation facilities. In St. Catherine and Clarendon, we will be spending some 17.5 million British pounds on irrigation facilities to support 795 hectares in the St. Catherine and Clarendon area. This is to join the Essex Valley project, and the High Commissioner from Great Britain is here with us today, and want him to know we are appreciative of the grant of the British government, and now the Essex Valley project is well on its way, 35 million British pounds. Support is being given to new and emerging industries, with the big ticket items being bamboo, cannabis, yes, cannabis, call it what you want, cannabis, marijuana, ganja, okay, same thing. Sea island cotton, hemp, castor beans, coconut, along with our other orchard crops. These products, Mr. Speaker, are part of the vision for a new agro-based industry in a new Jamaica on the road to increased economic growth and job creation. When you look at bamboo, Mr. Speaker, is one of the emerging alternatives to the plastics, the very thing we have just banned. Bamboo is now one of the emerging alternatives for the creation of a variety of products that are biodegradable. Okay? Absolutely. Lunchbox, you name it, a whole range of things. Right? In fact, these include paper, bed sheets, cups, kitchen and facial towels, diapers, tissue, furniture, and other home accent pieces, all can be produced from bamboo. J.C. Hutchinson will tell you more about that. He has been to bamboo conferences. Right? Then, Mr. Speaker, castor beans. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, that there are countries where entrepreneurs in other countries get castor beans from Africa, make castor oil and put made in Jamaica on it. Put made in Jamaica on it. Our castor oil is sought after. We are going to have castor bean orchards. One of the good news is that it can be grown on marginal land. It doesn't have to be a perfect land. And so we have already identified 2,000 acres in the Mitchelltown area of Clarendon, where we're going to have our first major castor bean orchard right down there in Clarendon. Cannabis is having its challenges, but we are working it out one day at a time. One day at a time. So far, we have had 627 applications from over 200 applicants for different types of production of cannabis-related products, mostly for the medicinal industry. 33 have been approved already, 11 are on the verge of being approved, 178 applications are at the conditional approval stage, Mr. Speaker. And the capacity of the Cannabis Licensing Authority, we have to work very carefully with them. There are some problems that we're having which are bigger than the CLA. One of them is the question of money, the movement of money. It's not a simple issue because the United States government has taken a very strong posture in relation to the movement of money related to cannabis. There is some early sign of potential redress, however, where in the passing of a recent law by the U.S. government on hemp, which is low in THC, high in CBD for the CBD oils, and apparently in passing that law, they have now relaxed some of the banking rules surrounding that type of cannabis or that type of hemp. So with the ambassador, Jamaica's ambassador in Washington, is working with me and the government hand in hand, seeking to find a place of accommodation for the legitimate banking of companies that are legitimately licensed in Jamaica. Let me just say finally on this issue that, of course, the Prime Minister directed it and announced it, that we are having 2 pilot projects in their compound, St. Elizabeth and Orange Hill in St. James area. We are putting some $15 million up front in coordinating unit established to get those pilot projects going, because I want the small farmers to know that we are not going to be blocking them from being legitimately involved in the cannabis business. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry, through the Revitalized Trust for Agricultural Production, will provide incentives for small farmers in a number of areas, including Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, peppers, sweet corn, dasheen, cassava, yams, sorrel, spices, strawberries, pineapples, onions, and other condiments and livestock such as small ruminants. $550 million has been allocated for this productivity incentive program. Now, critically, Mr. Speaker, I want members to focus with me just very briefly on this, because what I'm about to say is virtually at the heart, the very heart of agricultural and agro-processing expansion in Jamaica. Work with me, listen to me for a moment. First of all, you have to identify the markets. We have identified 5 distinct markets that are underdeveloped, underexplored, while we are here courting poverty. And we're bringing in the food on the same plane to feed the tourists, while we have idle lands and idle hands. Can't work. CARICOM is the second one, regional market of 15 countries, where we have duty-free access into CARICOM, but we're not selling to them. They are importing from third countries. Crying out for Jamaican products and cannot get the Jamaican products, believe it or not. What's the other one? Third country market for exotic Jamaican products, right? We are talking about mature markets like European markets that want exotic things from Jamaica and can't get it. That's another market. And a lot of those young people who are doing all of those different types of exotic wines and spices and sauces, these can be systematically targeted to these unique markets globally. But Mr. Speaker, what is the fifth and perhaps most exciting of these 5 distinct markets? The school feeding program. School feeding program. We do not have a properly structured, consistent school feeding program that will ensure that our children get the best nutritional support that is possible. We are going to have to do something about that. It is exciting to think that the things that we produce here is better for our children than the genetically modified flour that we import, genetically modified rice and other products that we import, when we have sweet potato, pumpkin, cassava, yam, you name it, dasheen, breadfruit. Excuse me? Okay, you go find that out. You have a speech to give, so you got to do research on it. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, I have asked the Prime Minister for permission to speak with the Minister of Education, Minister of Health, and my ministry. And we're going to sit down together and come up with a formal school feeding program. Listen, the United States Department of Agriculture has a school feeding program. A lot of other countries have a school feeding program. They're not leaving it up to the up and down of each principal deciding what they feed the children. That's unacceptable. We have to have a ground floor, a ground level, all right, and use our God-given products that we have, right, to produce and to make our children much more healthy. I wish to salute the Jamaica Producers Limited, who now provide bananas to schools at a reduced price. A reduced price of $5 per kilo. They are showing the way to what is possible, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the Mission Food Possible team who launched their school meal program at St. John's Primary School in February with a revised menu utilizing Jamaica's indigenous produce such as pumpkin, cassava, yams, and green bananas. So, Mr. Speaker, I am declaring that we must sit as a government with these 3 key ministries to come up with a proper structured program for school feeding. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, okay, wow.
Very wound up and enthusiastic.
Member time for speaking has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member's time be extended for 15 minutes to enable him to complete his presentation. There will be no extension beyond that.
Give him 15 on the mic.
Those in favor?
Carlos, give him 15 on the mic. Give him 15.
Those against? Yes, have it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable members. I just want to mention very briefly, but of importance, in order to take advantage of these various markets that I mentioned a while ago, as well as the school feeding program, I want to make it clear that you must have a vehicle. That vehicle, Mr. Speaker, is storage of fresh produce and processing of what you are not selling fresh. And we need the institutional capacity to be able to do that. The good news that I have for this honourable House today, Mr. Speaker, is that this is not now about government setting up all these things. The private sector is doing it. That is the good news. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, first of all, here are some examples of what's happening. First of all, the AMC complex at Spanish Town Road, which was decided by the previous government in January of 2016, 1 month before election, to sell the AMC complex. That means it was about to become another used car lot. 9 acres, AMC complex. When I go to the show, agricultural show, and young people say, our biggest problem, no factory space. And we have the AMC complex, and we were about to divest it, right, to become another used car lot. Well, that stopped. Okay? That is being stopped. And what we are going to have instead, Mr. Speaker, is a public-private partnership to develop the AMC complex as a modern agro-processing center, right? What's the next one? Grace Kennedy must be commended. They are setting up a new processing center at Denby in Clarendon, in addition to the joint venture we have with them at Hounslow, where they are processing things like Kellyan and other things down there, right? Then we have Jam Island Processing Limited in Williamsfield. Jam Island Processing is a quiet giant in the system right now. This week, they are going to export the largest number of yams they have done since they have started. They are exporting 7 containers of yams this week from Williamsfield. And they purchased, some people from Chapelton complained to me the other day, Mr. Shah, we can't sell with pumpkin. I called the guy from Jam Island. Within 3 days, he sent trucks down there, and they took out all the pumpkins. He exported 2 containers of pumpkins, and I'm short of pumpkin now. So I tell them to plant pumpkins. The man tells me that he can export as much as 12 containers of pumpkin per month. We need to plant more pumpkin, right? Then he's also going to go into food processing as well as the storage of fresh food. Then we have an interesting company that has taken over a company in St. Anne. Remember National Meats? Has now been taken over by an enterprising businessman, Mr. Richard Lake, supported by a very enterprising member of parliament. And they have taken over the facility. They have 200,000 square feet of refrigeration space. This is not all about Burger King. Burger King things will get the support up there too, yes. But their plan is to make available the services to purchase things from farmers, process the things, store what is to be stored fresh, process and freeze what is to be frozen, and guess what? Down the road, the hotels are along the north coast to service the hotels. This is what this is all about. And this is not government. This is government working with the private sector to show how the thing can happen so we can take systematic access to the markets that we have. Right? And at the same time, by the way, other companies that have made their business on imports, like Caribbean producers and Rainforest, have now indicated to me that they don't want to be left out of the action. They want to get into the local value chain as well, and they must be commended on their initiative and enterprise. So, Mr. Speaker, the time gone. And, you know, I should have formally pleaded for more time, given the extensive portfolio. But I want to say we are entering into a very aggressive infrastructure development program for production areas, right? Catchment and water storage systems, Minister. Expansion of irrigation networks, as I mentioned before. But there's another aspect to the irrigation that's exciting, and you who have small farmers, going to work with me on this one, okay? Even your CDF, you can access for some of it too. We have the largest producers of drip irrigation right here in Jamaica, in Manchester. Yet the majority of the drip irrigation systems that they have, they export it to the Caribbean. not being used in Jamaica. And what we need now is creativity. Our small farmers that have half acre or quarter acre, we need a portable irrigation system. And put the tank up on the hill, the drip lines come out, irrigate the first quarter acre, let it go, no pump, gravity feed, water down, and voila, production and productivity. And move the system to the next quarter acre and the next quarter acre because the portable system. We are looking at things like that because we have to support the value chain and support our small farmers. We have to have the expansion of drainage systems and road networks, construction of processing and grading facilities, right? The construction of global gap facilities for traceability, health, and food safety. That is taking place at our agro-parks. And I want to say that some of our investors at the agro-parks are really settling down nicely now. I recently toured down in the Spring Plains area, Dencon, that started out lending money. They have now backward integration. They are now about to reap 90 acres of onions, the largest onion production that we have ever had in Jamaica. 90 acres of onions are about to be reaped in Clarendon by Dencon right now. And they must be commended. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that in terms of traditional crops, I want to say, first of all, let me report that the Ministry has signed a memorandum of understanding for the establishment of an agroeconomic zone at Holland in St. Elizabeth, Minister. All right. The new Spring Gardens Agro Park in Portland is 80% established, and before the end of this fiscal year, the extension of Agro Park at Ridgepen in Hounslow will be launched. And Duff House, Minister, Duff House, Minister, you and the member from East Portland, Duff House. I want to hear the plan on Duff House. The building is ready, and I want action. You know what I mean? So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that we are not abandoning our traditional sectors, including critical crops like coffee, cocoa, coconut, spices, bananas, and so on. We cannot afford to abandon them. As a matter of fact, in the case of coconuts, Mr. Speaker, that has been grown as almost a hobby in Jamaica. Coconuts have now become a large-scale global industrial crop. One of the largest importers of coconut products, Grace Kennedy, doesn't get one can of coconut water from Jamaica, imported from a foreign country. And he's the largest exporter of coconut products into Canada. And we have idle land that can grow coconut. Can't continue. Cannot continue. The people from Surge Island who have told me they're coming out of sugar, they are ready to put the 5,000 acres into coconuts. They have told me that already. We're going to have that across the country. Where coconuts have to be, coconuts will be. The coffee industry, pimento, citrus, all of these industries are in decline. I want you to know that working with the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority, we are putting together a plan to rescue these industries. Putting together a plan to rescue it. Among them, to make the Blue Mountain coffee more accessible. I can formally advise you that I've written to the Chinese government. I've written to the government of China because I'm aware of a grant program they have for infrastructure development. And I've written requesting a grant of 100 million United States dollars to put into agricultural roads with an emphasis on the coffee areas. We are going to rebuild Blue Mountain coffee. I've already had discussions with the present owner of a large part of the Blue Mountain coffee system. And he has indicated to me that he's willing to look at us finding another partner to work with him to more aggressively build out the coffee industry. And I intend to do that. I can attest to that. It's true. Same thing with pimento, same thing with cocoa. and we're not stopping until we get rid of the disease that is associated with it. In sugarcane, Mr. Speaker, you are aware of all the problems we have with sugarcane, but I want to say to you that the work where we are reaping in Moneymusk and trucking the cane to Worthy Park and Appleton, it is working smoothly. Farmers are not complaining. The reaping is taking place and the processing is taking place efficiently at these two factories. We continue to have discussions with serious potential investors for the reopening of the Moneymusk factory. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that in terms of our small and medium enterprises, we are working with them in an inclusive way in order to build out the sector. We have the MSME entrepreneurship policy and 5-year implementation plan. We have the Jamaica Business Development Company that is working with us to try to get more work going among our small businesses in a formal and in a practical way. We're looking at the public procurement regulations, Mr. Speaker. In terms of public procurement, we have got to find a way where we have set aside a percentage of contracts that our small and medium enterprises can get access to. We are working that as well. We continue to roll out the Small Business Development Center model, with agreements were signed with 3 entities for the establishment of these centers in Manchester, Northern Caribbean University, in Kingston at the Maritime University, and in Trelawney at the RADA office there in Trelawney. Access to finance initiatives are being worked on very carefully in a number of areas. We're working with recent reports of the World Bank. We're working with the ministry and with the various, as I mentioned before, Exim Bank and so on, and of course I mentioned the issue of the dormant funds already. I just want to say the microcredit bill is before Parliament at this time, introduced by the Minister of Finance, and that will also help in terms of managing the issue of microfinancing in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, as my time is approaching, I just want to say that we have a number of important legislation to work on for the new year. The Companies Amendment Act, the Cooperative Societies Act, the Modernization of Intellectual Property legislation, the Trademarks Act and Rules, the Protection of New Plant Varieties Bill, the enactment of the Scrap Metal Act, the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority Act and related legislation, just to name a few, Mr. Speaker. And to say to you that at the Ministry, we are also ensuring that the Bureau of Standards, the National Compliance Regulatory Authority, the Veterinary Services Division, Plant Quarantine and Plant Inspection Branch, Food Storage and Pest Infestation Division, and others promulgate and promote the highest applicable standards and regulations for good agricultural and manufacturing food safety standards, Mr. Speaker. So let me say, Mr. Speaker, just today in Cabinet this morning, Cabinet has approved the tabling of a white paper on a national quality policy for 2019. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, as I'm wrapping up, that in terms of the fisheries sector, we have had to close the conch season temporarily to rebuild our assets in the ocean. And we have to take it very seriously, and I want to use this opportunity in this presentation to send out a message, Mr. Speaker, to poachers from places like Honduras, Costa Rica, and other countries. Leave our shores alone. Leave our fishing waters alone. Recently, we seized 2 boats, 2 ships were recently seized. And Minister of National Security, I hope you do what other countries do. When a certain period expires, those ships must be applied to the fisheries industry, sir. Yes? Including the patrolling in the system. And I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that in terms of the fishing industry, it is time for us now to get into the deep sea fishing. We have to get into the pelagic zone. right now, tuna swim past Jamaica. Tuna swim past Jamaica, smile as they pass. When they go to Trinidad, they catch them, and Trinidad has a tuna industry. Why can't we have a tuna industry in Jamaica? So we have to get into the pelagic zone, and I will say this to you, that in terms of the fisheries sector, I just want to make this one point. That in terms of the fisheries sector, I'm wrapping up now. I'm coming down now. Yes, wrapping. In terms of the fisheries industry, Mr. Speaker, it's time for us to go into deep sea fishing. Yes. The blue economy is awaiting us. Yes. It might require some accommodation where we have to remove some of the taxes on the fuel. Yes. That's part of why it's not competitive for us, because others are not paying 60% taxes on fuel to get into the deep ocean economy. So we have to take a careful look at that. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, have other things I could talk about. We have the transformation of entities. We are going to be merging a number of entities in the ministry. It's in my script. Fair Trading Commission with the Consumer Affairs Commission, the AMC with the ADC, Agricultural Development Corporation, the Banana Board into JACRA, the Jamaica Agricultural Society is to transition to a non-governmental organization. The Jamaica 4-H clubs to transition as well to a non-governmental organization. And Mr. Speaker, let me wrap up by saying we are going to work on consumer protection as well and take it very, very seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, let me just say in my closing that we are going to have programs, Minister of Culture, programs to have inclusive growth, to include the role of women and young people. We're going to have deliberate programs to put them together. And so, as I wrap up, I am at conclusion now, all right? There is no doubt that these are exciting times for Jamaica, for our economy, our industries, and our people. I am very happy, Mr. Speaker, to be part of this movement towards creating a more prosperous, equitable, and inclusive society. The Ministry I have the privilege to lead at this time in our history and development has a huge responsibility and role to play. We accept the duty willingly and commit ourselves to being in the vanguard of this movement. I have exhausted the time allowed, but all that I could share with you, this Honourable House and the people of Jamaica. Indeed, more will be shared by my colleague Ministers Hutchinson and Green. The work of this ministry is multifaceted, complex, and diverse. The tasks are assigned to us. We are committed to the job at hand and the journey that is ahead. Today I reach out to all Jamaica, to our partners, local and international, to our customers and stakeholders to join us on the way ahead as we recommit our pledge to work diligently and creatively so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity. And I want to affirm the support of the plans and programs that have been laid out in the approved estimates of expenditure, Mr. Speaker. May God bless you all, and may God bless Jamaica, land we love. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, we rise out of respect for the quality of the presentation made by the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. It's very challenging to be able to speak for an hour on a ministry that is so wide in scope, but he was able to capsule it and to give us the main points that are essential as we look forward to greater success in that sector. Thank you very much for a very excellent presentation, Minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, I read yesterday where a member of this Honourable House wrote very feelingly, about not having appropriate time to make an impact, because it usually gets a chance, the opposition gets a chance to speak only when it is very late. The next speaker today, Mr. Speaker, I am sure has enough time to make an impact today because he's starting before 4. So I'm expecting that in the time allotted to him, he will make the headlines if what he presents is appropriate. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to invite the member from Central Kingston to make his contribution to this sectoral debate.
Mr. Traits.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I too would like to express appreciation to the Minister of Agriculture for his presentation. And because he was constrained by time, may I offer just a suggestion which I hope will be acceptable. There's one area that is so pivotal to the level of agricultural development and indeed broader development, rural development that we speak, is of course the issue of agricultural education. And I had wished, but I'm sure somebody will tell her, the new member from Eastern Portland would join in a dream that her predecessor, Dr. Linvale Bloomfield, lamented, and also the member for West Portland had, that apropos the development of the human resources to buttress and execute these levels of agricultural development, which are absolutely critical for individual aspiration as well as national development, require the transformation of the College of Agriculture, Science and Education to be a university of agriculture. We made a mistake when in the 1940s, when the University of the West Indies was set up, we ceded agriculture to Trinidad. While we have the largest deposit of agricultural land and potential in the Caribbean, we need to redress that now, and case is aptly posed and positioned to carry out a full program of scientific agriculture to undergird all that the Minister has proposed this evening. So I'm hoping that that will be accepted as a suggestion. Mr. Speaker, the usual salutations are in order, and I wish to indicate that the presentation I offer is a collaborative one. I'm not here to condemn the activities of government or of any aspect of the education and training system. The role in education is to be collaborative. That is an aspect that has been well developed in our policy over many years and will be redolent in all I have to say. I regret the absence of the constituency debate, Mr. Speaker. Central Kingston suffers from low skills and poor housing. There is presently an interesting experiment which we are undertaking, which I hope will attract the attention of government and also many other members of parliament, in that there are large numbers of holdings where persons have been living without disturbance and without paying any rent for extensive periods of time, and are therefore entitled under law to title by adverse possession. It is something that representatives of inner city communities need to take into account. It is not to deny the established ownership of any person, but where ownership has been dormant, just like the funds, Minister, for many years, it is settled law that the occupant who can prove undisturbed occupation can in fact secure a title. And it is a way in which you give dignity, ownership, you revive dead assets in the inner city. And yes, more housing is needed, but please, those of you who have state power for the time being, do not discount and discard the investments of the past. The inner cities, whether it be of Spanish Town or of Maypen or of Kingston and St. Andrew, already have the investments of infrastructure. They may be dated, they may be in need of restoration, but it is far more economical to revive those than it is to build greenfield. And it is important because these communities, dilapidated though they are, have settled social organizations. They incubate families, churches, schools. Moving them to a new district disturbs those and creates frictions which are unnecessary. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, what $2 to $4 million can do to a big yard on over-appropriate terms? We must stop spurning that which we have spent on and declaring it obsolete and going to new areas which appear very attractive. We need to revive our inner cities. I wish to point out that the National Housing Trust has a tremendous responsibility in this regard, which they have not yet taken up. And it is vital that government place a priority upon doing this. Once the title is there, once there is a clear program for redevelopment, excuse me, the conditions of life can be greatly improved by a relatively small investment which can be accommodated within limited income. Mr. Speaker, poor housing infrastructure in the inner city underlies weak family structure. In situations where people are living in cramped communities where they have no sense of ownership, you find the proliferation of abuse, dysfunctional behavior, and crime. Is government, I ask, is this Parliament bold enough in this year of grace 2019 to affirm and incentivize permanent unions between man and woman? It is extremely important that we understand the value of fathers and mothers raising children. Inner city conditions do militate against that. It is important, notwithstanding our cultural traditions, to recognize how critical that is. Weak social relations, Mr. Speaker, cannot support a prosperous economy. Weak social relations cannot support a prosperous economy. Recently, Carimensa, the university-sponsored mental health entity, held a workshop, and they indicated on the basis of irrefutable scientific information the two main antecedents of criminal behavior. One is absent fathers, and two is abusive mothers. Now, in those circumstances, living conditions have a lot to do with those relationships. How many times do you come across people who wish to live together to form family units, who simply do not have the space, do not have the wherewithal to do that? Perhaps 100% of the persons in central Kingston who work are low-wage earners. They are a living representation of the working poor, and this has an effect upon their children. Social services are rudimentary. When we have a fire, there is no effective agency to call upon for remediation, and therefore a family unit, or more than one, is broken down, and the consequences are of social disorder and of expense to the state. Speaker, I am hoping that the government will allow for the use of the large and unused Machado facilities on East Queen Street to be used as a training center for the business processing outsourcing operation industry. It was bought by the Heart Trust for that purpose many years ago, and there are ready purchasers for it now. You can't have dead assets. Government, the same reasoning that the Minister of Agriculture used earlier applies to the inner city as it does to agricultural lands. The same is true, Mr. Speaker, for the lands adjacent to the General Penitentiary. They've been sitting there for years, unused. They must be used for housing uplift now. They must be used in order to ensure that we have. We did, but even before it is moved, Mr. Speaker, the lands are there. They do not demean the security of the area, and they must be used in order to ensure that people have a decent place to live. Mr. Speaker, many of the Many of the young people in Central Kingston have had the opportunity to register with the National Youth Service Corps. I want to give commendation and praise to that movement. Its only defect is that it needs to be quadrupled. It is one of the real antidotes to crime because it takes away the scourge of idleness from our young people. If we had more of those in our inner cities, then we would not have to trifle with some of the expensive and dangerous security measures that presently eat away our resources and our heart and shed our blood. May I ask for support from the appropriate ministries for the Alpha Institute for Troubled Youth. Music, as you know, is a wonderful measure, Minister, of moving towards behavior change. The Army, which has benefited over the years so greatly from the Alpha Boys Band, needs to, just across the fence, needs to be engaged in the wholesale management and expansion. They could deal with 2,000 young people there instead of 200. And this would have a tremendous effect on those whose schools, families, and police are at their wits' end. Introduce them to music, you give them a career, you give them a prospect in life, you give them a dignity which could make all the difference. Mr. Speaker, it is a matter of pride as I end this very brief these very brief thoughts on Central Kingston, that in the list, the lexicon of the police divisions and the levels of crime in each of them, instead of being at the top, which it used to be 15 years ago, the division of Central Kingston is now at the bottom. Crime is being contained because people have a sense of hope, political tribalism is ended, and there is a good prospect for their future. This is to be commended, and I extend and invite the Minister to note the efforts of Superintendents Gordon, Phoenix, Hamilton, and others who have helped in this regard. We are looking at positive development. Mr. Speaker, I wish now to sequence from the particular remarks on the constituency to the general remarks regarding education and training. I start with a premise. The way to achieve high growth for the nation and the prospect of personal achievement for all is through exponential rather than incremental transformation of education and training. Exponential rather than incremental transformation of education and training. Mr. Speaker, this is not the time and place for this, but let us be frank. The events of the past month in relation to education have set policy adrift. Gossip abounds, suspicion surrounds personnel at the ministry, the Caribbean Maritime Union, the National Education Trust, and the Hard Trust. You can't decapitate an entity and not expect it to stagger. Questions will be asked, and I hope that explanations will be given by the appropriate minister as to quiet these events. They are serious. The Prime Minister, yes indeed, he will answer, I'm sure, these questions. This presentation has three premises to it. First, the decline of social capital remains the greatest clamp to educational outcomes. Not the absence of labs, not even new buildings, the absence of social capital. Further, that there are structural issues impeding educational progress, and these are unacknowledged and unremediated. And thirdly, that financial insufficiency and inefficiency are impeding our direction. Our political leadership, and this applies to both sides, is yet to be so convinced, let alone to convince the nation, that education and training are the only legitimate pathways to step up in a life. The budget this year does not reveal this consciousness. Mr. Speaker, the budget for recurrent expenditure in education and training this year is a mere 2% over what it was last year, less than inflation. If you look at the projections in the Yellow Book down to 2023, it hovers between 6 and 7%. It is a flat budget. The capital budget is even more in a more serious predicament. It is down from 1.7 billion to 1.25 billion this year, and it goes down by 40, 60, 70% in the succeeding years. This is not the time for polemics. It is simply to say that if we recognize the premise that I gave, that it is not incremental but exponential transformation of educational outcomes that's going to make the difference to everything, then we have to look at these figures, at these allocations again. My concern, I am now convinced that social competencies are what is missing and should be given equal emphasis. Mr. Speaker, when a child went to school in past years, we used to be able to assume that that child had command of a level of language, of social readiness, of respect for others. They were ready to learn. They had some measure of parental support. They had some adequate nutrition. And very, very importantly, they had been or went to Sunday school or Sabbath school. Very importantly, all of us have had that experience. Not any longer can we make these assumptions in the face of broken families and community weakness. And our schools are not yet equipped to assume responsibilities of remediation. We have to face reality. The transformation of education project of the last 15 years is itself in need now of transformation. Individualized learning, which is a mantra of the time, needs to include social competencies. Mr. Speaker, come with me to the teachers' colleges, and the principals will tell you that the academic qualifications of those entering are stronger than they were many years ago. Ask them about their social competencies, and they will tell you they will become disillusioned, because many of them are simply not ready attitudinally in order to face that level of education, let alone to take their place in the classrooms. This is very, very important. The government has to undertake a revised concordat with the churches in education. The churches still sponsor or own almost 50% of all education institutions in Jamaica. They remain, despite many weaknesses, a main source of the purveying of usable values and attitudes. The honesty, the loyalty, the considerations of decency that are required for character development. This is what the schools need now in order for children to be ready to undertake the education in academics and in vocational subjects. Attitudinal and behavioral change have to become centerpieces of education practice as never before. Mr. Speaker, banning corporal punishment without rethinking the entire disciplinary code and enforcing appropriate alternatives only increases the war zone that teachers complain about. I commend instances where individuals, schools, as well as political leaders are making innovative changes. The Minister of National Security, in his presentation, spoke of a useful experiment at Glendevon, where separating boys from girls and buttressing this with effective leadership, school leadership, intentionally focused at behavioral change, has had good effects. The efforts that were made by the former member from South St. Andrew, and are continued by the present minister for the transformation of educational opportunities there, is another good example. What goes on at the Trenchtown Polytechnic Institution is a worthy model for all of us to follow. This is what we mean by the transformation of the transformation, Mr. Speaker. These are vital changes. Leadership is key. Mr. Speaker, when do you think we as a government, all of us, will get around to face the fact that the mandatory 60-year-old retirement limit is no longer serviceable? Teachers at the point of their greatest experience. Leaders, just when they are mature and have control of their institutions, are being sent home peremptorily because of their age. We're going to have to look for flexibility. I'll speak a little more about that, but this is critical for us to maintain talent in a situation where hemorrhage is taking place. Beside us, we've lost, 100, 120 of our best science and math teachers. This year alone, you know. This year alone. And the scholarship program that we have put in place from the previous administration and carried out by the present administration is now faltering. Instead of 100 scholarships for science, math, yes, we now have 14 and 14 and 16 going by the tally given to me by the educational institutions. These are while we are losing multiples of that. So we have to be intentional about the changes that we are taking place. Here are some critical problems. Mr. Speaker, 1/5 of our children are still not going to school every day. Missing 20% of the school week is a recipe for failure. In most cases, it is because there is no lunch money, or there is no bus fare, or some other thing. With the greatest of respect for all that government has done in respect of improving the conditions of PATH, nothing could be more crucial than a fixed allocation that is going to be available to ensure that we bring our attendance up to date. And sometimes the principals are the ones who have to recommend because they know the condition of the children, particularly in the rural areas. Mr. Speaker, it was joy to listen to the Minister of Agriculture speak about the nutrition program and the incorporation of local foodstuffs. We must do this. There are at least 350,000, probably 400,000 of our children who need to be fed good Jamaican food for breakfast and for lunch every day. Not just because it would increase aggregate demand for agriculture, but also because it would create the very foundation upon which any education, any reading, any writing, any numeracy can take place. And therefore, this is a program that requires all the collaboration that can be done. The Nutrition Products Limited is limping. I don't know why. It was left in a profit position. We need to make that the priority. I notice he raised his voice at that 5th priority because it is so important. Mr. Speaker, the budget for early childhood education this year is flat. I know the government wants to do more, but the unexamined system of allocations prevents you from doing so. I want to invite you to set a target. By 2020, next year, no, let's be realistic, 2021, not 33%, not 40% of the early childhood teachers must be trained teachers, but 100%. Yes? 100%. And Mr. Speaker, may it please you, that training doesn't only mean level 2 or level 3 in heart, because the heart, H-E-A-R-T, in an early childhood teacher, the attitudinal position is as important as the cognitive one. Yes? I believe if we did that, paid more attention to the very good Brain Builders program that the former Minister of Education instituted, but hasn't got off the ground, we need to make sure that our aim and our achievement come closer together. Yes? This is vital for the time being. We need to, our certification of basic schools, the fulfillment of the physical standards is good, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Asking a question, an underutilized assessment system. It's called the GOLIP, the Grade 1 Learning Inventory Program, I believe. What is that telling us in recent years? It's telling us that 1/3 of our children are still not ready for primary school. Yes? And we need to reduce that considerably. This is a foundational investment that can make a difference. Mr. Speaker, when we get to the primary schools, much can be said. But the central issue that I didn't realize when I served, and I'm suggesting that we haven't come to grips with sufficiently, is the fact that many of our children are being taught and asked to read in a language they do not understand. It's a simple fact. We are going to have to be intentional, as we have not been up to now, in ensuring that we sequence from Jamaican Creole into Jamaican Standard English. This is still an unachieved aspect. It is a controversial one. We need to study it, and we need to make strides in this regard if we want our children to succeed. There's another quick aspect that I want to make. When we put our children into high school, spend the time between when PEP is finished, PEP in March, until school, I would take it to the end of the calendar year, and simply re-socialize the children to the culture of the school, to the standards of behavior, to the personal circumstances that they are in, to the deficiencies in English and math and science, and place them in a position where they can then benefit from the instruction that the teachers and facilities have been provided to give. Barring there's some hard lessons that we all have to learn. You can't give every high school student the same amount of money. You can't make that allocation. The truth is that some high schools require more in order to be able to have a certain level of achievement. Right now, schools are living on next year's check because many of them have lost money because of the withdrawal of the school fees and because people are coming back to them for the money that they paid. Yes. Unless what you have to do, of course it's more. If you want to make that point, go ahead, please. I'll keep quiet. Having said it already, what is necessary is for us to calculate what is lost and to make it up. If we don't do that, there's going to be a deficit. It's happening right now, and the only thing, only in some cases where special appeals are made, is it in fact being restored. Indeed. Mr. Speaker, coming back to an old hobby horse of mine, automatic promotion is a conveyor belt for failure. It is useless sending a child to a higher level when they haven't achieved the basis of the previous level. Now, it's controversial. It's going to take combination of wit and wisdom on both sides and within the teaching profession. But we are doing this without thoughtful assessment of the consequences of doing that. Minimum standards must be maintained at all levels. It is pointless for us to be graduating illiterates. And we are getting to the point where we are so complacent with this that we are not taking the necessary strict actions needed in this regard. Mr. Speaker, one of the fundamental problems of the formal education system now is the contractual inbred rigidity of our arrangements with teachers' engagement. Mr. Speaker, where is the Jamaica Teaching Council bill? Where is the Reform Code of Education? These are needed to help towards remedying this situation. Yes? Mr. Speaker, do members fully understand the inefficiencies that are built into the system, where a teacher who acts in a position for 1 year of vacancy, after that is tenured to that school for life? For life. It is costing us over $3 billion a year to keep teachers out of class because of the rigid arrangements that are at stake. Who can forget the example given by Member Azan in the Standing Finance Committee when he spoke of one school now depleted, which has 9 extra teachers, the other school down the road now overcrowded, needing 9 teachers, but one can't move to the other. We got there, Mr. Speaker, because one of the reasons is that we bargain with the public service, including the teachers, on one standard for all. We reward the good, the mediocre and the poor at the same level and wonder why they leave us. And therefore, it is of great importance that we look and seeing how we are going to change this at the earliest time, because we have built in an inefficiency for ourselves. Mr. Speaker, it is vitally important that we look at the anomalies in the tertiary sector, and I wish to invite the Minister of Finance to complete the restoration of the equality between the University of Technology and the University of the West Indies. That is of absolute importance. And I end by repeating the premise: the way to achieve growth for the nation and the prospect of personal achievement for all is through the exponential rather than the incremental transformation of education and training. I thank you.
House Leader. House Leader.
Why? Oh, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the member who usually complies with the time allotted and has done a very fine job, and I've taken careful notes of what he said and his suggestions. Yes. Yes. Mr. Speaker, we will now invite the Minister of... Sorry, I asked for suspension of the debate and a recommittal of statements by ministers to enable the Minister of Health to make a statement on measles.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Dr. Tufton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise this Honourable House and the people of Jamaica that the Ministry of Health is monitoring the island for imported cases of measles, given the recent increase in cases in the United States and across the region. Mr. Speaker, as at the 30th of March 2019, there were some 3,674 suspected cases and 596 confirmed cases in the region of the Americas, with over 300 of the confirmed cases from the United States of America. In Europe, in January 2019, there were 881 cases of measles reported from 19 countries. Mr. Speaker, measles is a highly contagious illness caused by a virus that replicates in the nose and throat of an infected child or adult. The virus circulates worldwide, and approximately 90% of suspected persons not vaccinated who are exposed to someone with the virus will be infected. So it's highly contagious. The last case of indigenous measles in the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, and in Jamaica occurred in 1991. Mr. Speaker, in order to stop the disease from spreading, 95% of children in Jamaica need to be fully vaccinated with the 2 doses of MMRI at 12 months and MMRI-2, MMRI-1 at 12 months and MMR-2 at 18 months. There has been a decrease, Mr. Speaker, in uptake of the vaccines over the last number of years. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, Jamaica had some 89% coverage of MMR1 and 82% coverage of MMR2. We are going to therefore, Mr. Speaker, and I'm using this opportunity to appeal to all parents to visit the nearest health center to ensure that their children are fully vaccinated, as measles has the potential to kill more children than any other vaccine-preventable disease. The vaccines, Mr. Speaker, can be had at all public centers across the island free of cost. I'm repeating that, Mr. Speaker. It's important that parents who have children who are not vaccinated visit with your health center, get vaccinated out of an abundance of caution. We have the supplies, yes, out of an abundance of caution, given what is happening and unfolding throughout the country. Children are particularly vulnerable, I guess adults also, but I'm making the appeal, or children. Mr. Speaker, most cases of measles are mild and symptoms usually appear 10 to 12 days after exposure to an infected person, but may appear as early as 7 days and as late as 21 days after exposure. Measles typically begins with a high fever, a cough, runny nose, and watery eyes, red and watery eyes. 2 or 3 days after symptoms begin, Mr. Speaker, tiny white spots may appear inside the mouth. 3 to 5 days after symptoms begin, a rash breaks out, usually as flat red spots that appear on the face at the hairline and spread downward to the neck, trunk, arms, legs, and feet. Small raised bumps, Mr. Speaker, may also appear on the top of the flat red spots. Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise this House that the complications from measles include ear infection and diarrhea, while severe complications include pneumonia, swelling of the brain, and even death. Pregnant women may give birth prematurely or have a low birth weight if they are so impacted. In response to the increase in cases worldwide, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry, since the beginning of the year, enhanced its response, including sensitization and training of approximately 60 healthcare professionals in the health regions in measles outbreak response, with mandatory training of rapid response teams across the island. Information related to the revised target groups and parish coverage for MMR1 and MMR2 vaccines have been communicated to all parish health teams. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry is recirculating communications to sensitize doctors and other health professionals about the increased risk of measles importation and to heighten the index of suspicion for measles. The communication is also, Mr. Speaker, a reminder to doctors and nurses regarding the surveillance protocol for fever and rash, including the importance of immediate Class 1 notification and sampling on first contact and prioritize vaccination of all children in the target group with 2 doses of MMR vaccine. Mr. Speaker, Vaccination Week in the Americas will be celebrated in January from the 27th of April to the 3rd of May 2019, which represents this occasion a great opportunity for Jamaica to protect its communities against measles transmission and to do its part to end the current outbreaks in neighboring countries. This opportunity will be used, Mr. Speaker, Vaccination Week that is, to increase public awareness about measles prevention, promote vaccination, and administer MMR vaccines to vulnerable groups. In the event of an outbreak, which we do not wish for, and we are prepared to, as best as possible, try to avoid. But in the event of an outbreak, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health stands ready to activate the emergency protocol, so there is continued coordination between the national and local levels, identify migratory flows from abroad, that is the arrival of foreign persons, and internal flows, movement of population groups, to facilitate access to vaccination services, increase vaccination coverage and strengthen the epidemiological surveillance in border areas as is necessary, and vaccinate at-risk populations without proof of vaccination or immunity against measles and rubella. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Campbell.
I wasn't in the section that the votes were being bought. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are a few times when there is a health situation occurring in the country and I'll get a call from the media to respond to what is going on. And at the point where you get the call, you are uninformed as to exactly what is the status of the particular illness and the preparation and all of those things that have been used. When you then say you are not told, you have a section of the society that is quick to say that you only speak to criticize. Well, Mr. Speaker, the only way to remedy that problem is to ensure that there is sharing of information. And I have asked before, and I'm asking again, and I think it's a protocol that could be observed by all the ministers. If you have constant dialogue with the spokesperson and keep them in the know, then there will be absolutely no need for one to be out there criticizing that which was discussed. Or if they're doing that, you could simply produce the minutes to show that this matter was discussed. But in lieu of having that level of consultation, we cannot get consensus going forward. I want to thank the Minister for this statement here today, but I have a few observations as well. Mr. Speaker, as a man of the scripture, it says that the wicked flee where no one pursueth. That's the member right there. But Mr. Speaker, measles is also a viral illness. Similar to dengue is a virus, H1N1 is a virus. So therefore you will find that some of the presentation is quite similar. And looking at the statement, you will see it where it says that the initial presentation will be high fever, runny nose, and those sort of flu-like symptoms that you will have, viral illness symptoms. And it is unfortunate that the country should be in the throes right now of having two of those conditions and possibly a third. I want to also lend my voice, and I believe that of the opposition as well, in encouraging parents, guardians to ensure that their child or ward is vaccinated against measles. Now, I also want to encourage them that even if you miss the initial date for the first, what is recommended at 12 months for the first dose, that there is a protocol for those persons who come in late. There's also a protocol for those persons who would have missed one of the vaccine. And so persons out there need not to worry if they have already gone past the 12 months period and didn't get the first shot, that they can come in, and there is a protocol in place to bring them up to date with the immunization. I am also wondering, Mr. Speaker, if we should... Most persons in here are probably already immunized, I would assume. I'm also wondering as well, when we do the school medicals and we find that some of the persons are not up to date with their immunization. When I was in school, they used to come to school and offer some of the shots to ensure that these persons are up to date. But part of the reason why the uptake, as with the HPV vaccine, which is a well-needed one, but the uptake is low, is because of public education. And so it is critical and important that the minister educates the public about the contagious communicable diseases in a similar way to how he has taken on with the Jamaica moves. I don't think that there is any ambiguity in his communication around Jamaica moves. It's very good, right? And I would like to see that same level of clarity being brought to the discussion surrounding the communicable diseases so that the public can be fully aware and can make the appropriate decision. I want to ask the minister, though, if he's aware of any cases of measles in Jamaica as of April 23, 2019, whether local or imported cases. Is he aware of any cases of measles in the country?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I got the member, thank him for his contribution. He made some statements which I don't disagree with on the issue of collaboration. I agree that we need to collaborate, and to the extent that you're not satisfied with the collaboration, I'm more than prepared to review because I think it's important that we collaborate on issues of this kind. So in terms of the public education, you know, it is unfortunate that we have seen a decline in the uptake of measles vaccines and vaccines in general. I think the time may be now for us to review what has been the case in the past when we had 90+ percentage points. Having looked at the numbers, having prepared for vaccination week, which is coming up, and now with the triple whammy, if you will, possibility of measles, we should look at it. But I just want to say, too, that the anti-vaccine movement has become a lot more vocal in recent times and have really, in some sense, have been backed by big resources. One only has to look at social media, and you will hear and see significant campaigns around vaccines and its negative impact. It's very unfortunate because, as you and I know, vaccine saves 2 million lives a year based on what WHO says, and it is a good thing. And all of us, I think, need to play a part in this honorable house when we visit our schools, when we speak to parents, to encourage them on the benefits of vaccines. But it is true that the anti-vaccine movement has gained some ground in their global campaign around vaccines generally. So a review, I am open to that. The third one about whether or not there are any cases here, I actually just spoke to my chief medical officer yesterday inquiring about exactly that. I'm told that since we are not aware, based on the information I've had, that there is any imported case. From time to time, I am told that we do get imported cases, but we do not have cases that are spread locally. When we have a case, it's normally someone who came into the country with that particular virus and it manifested itself. And when those cases are found, obviously the person is dealt with appropriately based on the protocol. So I don't know that there are any cases now imported. I am told by the chief medical officer that she's not aware of any, whether imported or local.
Mr. Speaker, I am aware, and this is becoming a little bit too frequent for my liking. I am aware of at least one imported cases of measles within the last 30-day period. I cannot understand how it is that I could be made aware of these cases, but the ministry is unaware. This is not the first time that this is happening. This ought not to happen, Mr. Speaker, and we can agree that this ought not to happen. If there is a mechanism in place in the healthcare facilities, the case was reported, member from West Portland, to the Ministry of Health. And I am saying this is not the first time. It ought not to happen where you have an illness in the country the spokesperson is made aware, other physicians practicing are aware, but the line minister, the person in charge, who has the staff and resources at his disposal, keeps reporting that he is unaware, and then it is at a later date that a confession comes to say, well, this has been happening. It cannot be that the accusation is being leveled, that persons are reporting cases to me that they are not reporting to the ministry, because that is not correct.
Mr. Campbell, you have exhausted your 5 minutes.
I'm not. It's not my 5 minutes. It's in response to the question.
No. You have 5 minutes to respond to the statement by
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, are you interested in the truth?
Mr. Campbell, you have 5 minutes to respond to the statement by Minister. You may ask questions thereafter. So I will allow you to ask follow-up questions.
Mr. Speaker, I took the 5 minutes. I asked a question in the 5 minutes. The minister got up and he responded to the question. The information that he produced as the response, I am challenging it, and I'm saying that it is inaccurate. So if you're following the discussion, Mr. Speaker,
I will allow you.
I am not here at the behest
to do.
I am not here at the behest of the member from West Portland.
Yes,
and I don't know what he's talking about because he's uninformed about those things.
I am saying
so the point is that you're not going to bully me. You are not going to bully me. You can't bully me.
Mr. Campbell.
You can't bully me. Mr. Speaker.
Please go ahead and ask your question.
This is the Parliament of the land. This is the Parliament of the land. And there was an imported case of measles. It was reported to the ministry. And the minister stands here today to say that he has no knowledge of it. When I can confirm that the case was reported to the ministry.
Mr. Campbell. Members, Dr. Tufton, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, let me just say that if Mr. Speaker, I will investigate the matter, and I'm about to say that. I will, Mr. Speaker, through you. Let me just say to the member.
Members, go ahead, Dr. Tufton.
Let me just repeat. Up to yesterday, I inquired and did not get such information. I will investigate the matter. I'll ask the member to, if he has specifics. If he has specifics, he should give me that information. And I will ensure that if it is in case of fact, then the matter is dealt with. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I am going to ask of you, sir, to take command of the House. And here's why. For the persons who are not vaccinated, those persons, when exposed to an individual who has measles, 9 out of 10 of them will end up contracting the virus. 9 out of 10, 90%. The information that I'm putting here, I don't want anybody to pretend as if I am here seeking a friendship. I'm not. I am here representing the people of Northwest St. Ann, and I've been asked by the leader of the opposition to shadow the health ministry. And that is the job that I'm doing here. I will not be bullied or silenced when I come to this house to represent the people. It will never happen.
Mr.
Right?
Campbell.
I am saying to you,
Campbell,
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Campbell, please be seated for a while. Mr. Campbell, there are procedures that must be followed. So I'm asking you to follow the procedure. Go ahead and ask questions. Go ahead, Mr. Campbell, and raise your question.
Mr. Speaker, this man is nothing but a rabble-rouser. And every time you come here with a point, he tries to do that to try to deflect and take away from the gravamen of the issue. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, there is a protocol in the Ministry of Health. When you have certain class of diseases that are detected locally, they are reported to the ministry. Even just having fever and a rash is something that is reported. Now, I am saying, I have credible information that this case was reported to the ministry. This argument to say that I should go and report it at this late hour, Mr. Speaker, is nothing but an attempt to deflect from the situation because the matter was reported to the ministry.
Dr. Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson.
Brethren, just
Dr. Ferguson, go ahead.
I mean, you just come like you just want to bully everybody. Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson, address the speaker, please.
Take control of the
Please address the speaker.
No, I don't talk to the speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, you need to speak to the member from Western Portland.
Mr. Vaz. Dr. Ferguson, go ahead.
I am not going to be talking in all of this noise, sir. You need to control the member. It was difficult to get to 6. So you talk about 5, you still have 5.
Please address the speaker. Please address the speaker.
Mr. Speaker, can the member yield?
Mr. Speaker, the House is descending.
I just want to clarify something that was said. I just want to clarify something that the previous member said.
But when I get up again, I don't want to.
No, I'm just asking you to clarify so that, and then you can raise your point.
I yield, but
because
I'm telling you.
I've done some checks. I've done some checks, Mr. Speaker. Technology is an amazing thing, and sometimes it's important to clarify. Otherwise, we can create emergency cases that are not necessary. So I am told that a case at Hospital, where the member works, the private hospital in Montego Bay. But let me just finish. Mr. Speaker, let me just complete. A case at Hospital, which is not quite an imported case of measles, because the child had measles 2 weeks prior to coming to Jamaica and had complications when they actually came into the country. The child was treated for the complication, but it was not contagious at this point. And this is coming, hold on, can I finish? Listen, I keep saying, and I've tried to be very calm because shouting don't achieve anything in terms of the public. No, but I'm saying to you, hold on a little. Hold on, you had your chance to talk. I have no interest in coming here to hide information or to mislead the public. So please. Unlike you, member, who is a medical doctor, and you took time out to clarify that with me the other day, I have to depend on the advice that I get from the clinicians. And the advice I got, because I did recognize my responsibility to get the information, was that there were no cases to date. You have raised a case which clearly you are intimately aware of because of the place of work. I should have passed it on to the chief medical officer, the office of the chief medical officer is similarly aware, and they have just sent me this clarification. So I just want to just say to the public, because I think it's important, there are no cases of measles in Jamaica, and I think that's a very important clarification. Thank you very much.
How come she just clarified? He said it. So how come she just clarified? Mr. Speaker, I am speaking now, and I hope that good sense will prevail. When I asked the question, the minister said he spoke to the chief medical officer up to yesterday, and he was told that there is none. 5 minutes later, he's saying that technology has allowed her to now tell him that she is aware of the case and that it was reported, contrary to what the member from West Portland is saying.
Mr. Speaker.
The second point, Mr. Speaker.
Hold on.
The second point.
Mr.
You had your turn, Minister. That's what you just told.
Point of order. Mr. Speaker, I'm not changing my position. What I read here is quite clear, that the person had measles in another jurisdiction 2 weeks prior. Okay, 2 weeks prior, and had some complications which were not contagious. Now, I don't want to get into the semantics of a definition of measles. What I'm prepared to say, Mr. Speaker, is that if it's not contagious, it does not represent a threat to the population, and that, I think, is the substance of the member's argument. And that's all I'm saying. So I'm not changing my position, so don't change it for me, please. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health is not familiar with what constitutes an imported case. And that is the reason why he has described it as that.
No.
What is an imported case? What is an imported case? It is exactly what he has described. Somebody who had the illness in another country and traveled here. It was imported here. That's how you come by the definition of it. So for him to say there was no imported case, but that one person came here who had measles, Mr. Speaker, is contradictory.
The common sense. Dr. Ferguson. Members, please be quiet.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, given the porosity of our border, travel, trade, etc., what precaution are we now taking at the airports, seaports, etc.?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as I had said in the statement, the medical personnel have been resensitized to be on the alert, to look for the signs, the symptoms. Under the law, they have the authority to do inspections, to quarantine if necessary, and they have been alerted to look out for the signs, particularly from persons who are traveling from jurisdictions where you have this particular situation. So they are on alert. They are on alert for the possibility.
What are Mr. Speaker, what are the states now, the cases that have been confirmed? What are the critical states in the U.S. that are affected?
I don't have all the.
No, you don't understand what that's about.
I don't have all the specifics, but I can get that from you. But I know, of course, that in terms of where Jamaicans travel to, I mean, New York, the New York area is particularly vulnerable.
The member is speaking.
I don't have all the states, but I can get it for you. But I know the vulnerable areas like New York. Yeah.
Minister. Thank you, Minister Warmington. Minister, I see here on page 2 that you said there is a decrease in the uptake of vaccines over the last few years. Is it that there's a decrease in the uptake or a decrease in the coverage? Because there are two different things. One, you mentioned the anti-vaccine movement, but we are coming from a high of about 95%, thereabouts. Is it because of the lack of resources in the ministry why we are not back at that particular level? I understand the anti-vaccine uptake, but the movement, but it could not account for such a significant fall and a decline in the numbers, the percentage. So what is happening here? Can you indicate if it is a lack of resources over the past few years, as you indicated, and why is this so?
Thank you, member. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, agreeing with the member who spoke earlier that I think it may be time to review the approach that we have been taking. So I'm not prepared to say to what extent it is the anti-vaccine movement or it is coverage. I believe that the coverage has been sufficient, but there are margins of error there because we have been having some challenges also in vaccine as it relates to the HPV. And part of the challenges that I observe and speaking to the clinicians is that a lot of parents are resisting the vaccine or administering the vaccine to their children. I really do believe that because of social media, greater access, there is a much bigger voice than was the case previously around vaccines and what they represent. There are discussions now around, vaccine is putting the virus inside you and the vulnerabilities associated with that. So I think we need to recalibrate. We need to rethink the approach to overcome those objections. And this is a good time to do that. So I will be having discussions with the technocrats to see how best we can address it.
But might I suggest, Minister...
And by the way, that could account also. It's not a Jamaica problem. It is beyond Jamaica. The current uptick in measles across the world, one of the reasons that is advanced for that is because of a lack of take-up of vaccines. So it's not just a Jamaica issue, it is a global issue, again, because of the belief around vaccines and the negative implications.
Minister, you mentioned the HPV program. Might I suggest that part of the resistance we're having is because of the lack of information that has been going and communication of that information. So as you did indicate, you may have to look at that one also in terms of what happens. But there was a time, and it was mentioned earlier, that you had public health practitioners from the ministry going into the communities and demanding or going to the schools and looking at the cards. To what extent is that practice now, and what measures are being put in place in case it's not being practiced to ensure that that happens? Because you can't always rely on the parent taking the child to the public health facility, but usually we have them in schools. Where are we now?
That happens, I mean, the HPV vaccine is now administered in the schools. So it's not, we have abandoned that approach. Whether or not we need to increase, then it's something that I'm well prepared to look at. We're doing some work now around primary health care, which I'll speak to in the sectoral, which I think is going to be necessary to strengthen that preventative approach at the community level, because I think the time has come for review, given our high incidence of NCDs and the fact that we're more focused on the curative side as opposed to the prevention side. And as you know, vaccines are an important part of prevention. So the answer to your question is that we still do that, but I'm very open to looking at it and the team and reviewing where necessary to try and increase, given the new threats that we are observing.
And one final one, Minister. There was a report in the press recently by an investigative reporter out of one of the daily newspapers. But that tells a story that has been happening in communities. In light of what is a potential triple whammy, as you mentioned a while ago, could you have a policy change to ensure that it's not just one day a week that particular vaccination is given at the clinic, but have your staff deployed so that you can have more than 1 day per week or 1 day per 2 weeks, or consider it as an emergency, and do the appropriate things so that we can have and notify the communities and nationally so that we are going to have it so many days per week at these particular centers so that people can be aware. And those who have not been vaccinated, and you are encouraged to get vaccinated, will go and take the appropriate shots.
It's more an administrative issue, I would think, than a policy issue. And it's an issue around resources and what we have to do. I mean, the HPV vaccine, for example, was somewhat affected by the flu and the dengue outbreak because we had to redirect resources to try and deal with those that represented a more immediate challenge. So I would say that could easily be part of any review that takes place. Yeah, could be part of any review that takes place.
Yes. Minister, I've listened about the take-up of the vaccines, etc., but as a matter of contingency, I would just like to know, given what is happening at some of our facilities now, already are the physical infrastructure at the hospitals to manage in the unfortunate event that we have an outbreak here?
Well, part of the reason for creating the awareness, which includes also awareness among the frontline health staff, is to prepare yourself just in case. And I want to just emphasize for the listening public that as of now, we don't have an outbreak, and we don't foresee having one. So we're not trying to create panic, but we're trying to create awareness so that we ensure that we are vigilant, and to the extent that we can get more persons to take up the vaccines, then it helps. The hospitals are always under pressure. The health system, when you have a spike in any kind of outbreak. You saw it in dengue, you saw it in flu, and if you were to have another, whatever that is, it would similarly be the case. Now, we cope, but it's a matter of how you move around resources and manage the process until you can have more adequate facilities. So I would say that we are prepared. We would be able to cope. It would put some pressure on the system without a doubt, but we would do what is necessary because our healthcare workers are very aware and able and experienced in dealing with crises of this kind.
Yes, Mr. Fagan. Order, please. Mr. Fagan.
Collaboration. Is there any collaboration or any kind of workings going on between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education to have the dialogue going?
Mr. Speaker, part of the sensitization is collaborating with our other ministries and agencies, including the Ministry of Education.
Mr. Samudo.
Mr. Speaker, first I ask for recommittal of statement, questions and answers to questions. But prior to that, I wish to bring to the House's attention that the time being after 3:30, I ask that questions that are to be answered be allowed at this time.
Those in favor? Those against? There's of it.
And now I ask for the recommittal of questions and answers to questions.
Those in favor? Those against? Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister answer question number 1 standing in my name on the notice paper?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member from Central Manchester was provided previously with answers to the questions that were tabled, and the member subsequent to that asked other questions. I have both sets of answers. For completeness, the answers which were provided are fairly long and will occupy the time of the House for some time, so I ask the indulgence of the members. Question number 1. With respect to the joint venture agreements between the Fisheries Corporation of Jamaica, FCJ, and the China Harbour Engineering Company for the development of the Nugget Technology Park in Portmore and the Morant Bay Urban Centre in St. Thomas, respectively, will the Minister please provide A, the key commercial terms of each of these two joint venture agreements? And the response: the joint venture agreement of each project has the same key commercial terms, save and except that the government facilities currently operated from Morant Bay, St. Thomas will be relocated and housed in the Morant Bay Urban Centre. Both projects will start at the same time and are projected to be completed at the same time, subject to sale or lease of individual units, and each project will have its own board of directors and its own project company. The narrative which I'm about to give of the key commercial terms applies to each project. These projects being the Nugget Technology Park in Portmore and the Morant Bay Urban Centre in St. Thomas. Shareholdings. The participants of the joint venture will be FCJ, that is the Fisheries Corporation of Jamaica, with 29% shareholding. CHEC, that is China Harbour Engineering Company, with 30% shareholding, and any other investor who may take up to 41% shareholding in the joint venture within 12 months of the effective date of the joint venture agreement. The effective date is the date the parties execute the joint venture agreement. FCJ will be the project owner, while CHEC will be the developer contractor as well as an investor. FCJ, CHEC, and other investors will be the shareholders in the company. Their shares will depend on the total value of the equity contributed, and shares will be allocated as follows. I said before, FCJ, Fisheries Corporation of Jamaica, they will have 29%. CHEC will have 30%, and other investors, including Jamaicans via the stock market through an initial IPO, could have as much as 41%. FCJ's equity contribution, their contribution to equity will be the transfer of the Goodyear property to the project company and the actual costs and expenses incurred by FCJ in connection with the conceptual design of the project, costs and expenses incurred in the environmental impact assessment, and any other costs incurred by FCJ for the preparation of the conceptual design of the project. CHEC's equity contribution. The equity to be contributed by CHEC to the project company will be the feasibility study of the project, actual costs and expenses incurred by CHEC of the geotechnical and hydrological investigations, the topographic surveys, development of the detailed engineering design works and master plan for the project, and any cash contribution that they may make in support of their 30% equity position. Now, any equity contribution that exceeds the agreed percentage to be contributed will be deemed a loan to the project company. Evaluation of the shareholders' equity will be carried out by a chartered accountant within 6 months after incorporation of the project company. The shareholders may invite additional persons to contribute equity and participate as shareholders in the project company. In this regard, by the 5th year, the FCJ and CHEC may consider, and if deemed favorable, offer any portion of their respective shareholding by way of an IPO to the Jamaican public. Financing. The project will be financed by a combination of debt and equity. The project company shall be the borrower of the debt without personal recourse to the shareholders or the government of Jamaica, with no government guarantee or guarantee from FCJ. CHEC will use its best endeavors to secure the debt financing at the most favorable terms. Additionally, any reputable financial institution or local investor may participate in the project. The total sum of the project is to be secured before the start of the project. If the loan is not secured before the startup, then CHEC is obligated to use its own resources to provide bridge financing to initiate the project, and this will be in the form of a loan to the project company, which interest rates will not exceed the interest rate that would ordinarily be paid had the financing been secured with China Development Bank. Debt repayment will be from earnings of the project, which will be placed in an escrow account. The project company may refinance its debt or any portion thereof if more favorable loan financing terms are available. The role of the FCJ. The FCJ will provide duplicate certificate of title and duly executed instrument of transfer for the Goodyear property. It will provide its contributing equity to the project company, which would be land, the surveys, the feasibility and business plans. No cash equity will be provided to the project company by FCJ. It will secure easements, right-of-way, or licenses that may be required from any other landowner or persons. And it will assist with the provision of water, electricity, and other utility services for the project company. It will prepare the site layout plan and have SABE approved by the relevant municipal authorities. It will obtain all approvals as may be required from the GOJ and relevant municipal corporations, NEPA, etc. It will develop the design concept of the project, and the FCJ will apply for special economic zone status for the project company. The role of CHEC. CHEC will develop a master plan, building plans, infrastructure plans, and detailed designs, conducting economic and technical feasibility studies for the project, arranging the project financing to be secured by the project company, and FCJ's equity in the project company, which is the land, will be part of the collateral used to secure project financing. CHEC will do the engineering. Well, it will be the engineering. It will be the engineer, and it will procure and construct the project. And CHEC will contribute equity to the development of the project, and that will be the conceptual designs, the feasibility plans, the surveys, the master planning, detailed designs, and it will also make a cash contribution, if necessary. It will employ not less than 80% Jamaicans in the labor force for the construction of the site. the project company and its role. The project company will be a limited liability company and will be incorporated under the laws of Jamaica, and it is with its registered business in St. Thomas. That is its business address. On its incorporation, the project company shall execute a deed of adherence binding it to the terms of the joint venture agreement. Entering into an engineering, procurement, and construction contract with Czech within 2 weeks of its incorporation. It will ensure the construction of the development based on the joint venture agreement, with its core business being design, development, finance, construction, and after completion to own, operate, and manage the completed facilities. And this may, of course, entail sale or lease of any of the said facilities. In the event of termination, the joint venture may be terminated by the parties where there is or are mutual agreement. Shares are listed on the stock exchange as a consequence of an IPO, winding up or dissolution of the company, bankruptcy, liquidation, dissolution, and breaches in any material respect of the joint venture which is not remedied within the agreed time. Where the FCJ terminates the JV as a result of any material breach of the JVA by check or the project company will not be obliged to make those payments prior to FCJ and or the project company securing financing for the completion of the project. So in other words, in the event of a termination, the FCJ would not be required to pay until they have secured financing. Where check terminates the JVA as a result of either mutual agreement, bankruptcy, liquidation, or dissolution of FCJ, or there is a material breach by FCJ of the JVA, then the FCJ and or the project company shall reimburse check its direct cost for the detailed designs, feasibility studies, master plan, and any equity cash contribution check made, and any outstanding payment due to check under the EPC contract for work done as a result of any bridge financing they would have provided. On the full reimbursement to check and without cost to FCJ and or the project company, check shall transfer its shareholding to the project company and discharge any mortgage, lien, or charge on the land. Question B, which was asked by the member, which is the process used to select the joint venture partner in each case. The Factories Corporation of Jamaica received an unsolicited investment proposal from CHEC, which was not influenced or otherwise initiated by FCJ. On receipt of the unsolicited investment proposal, FCJ assessed the merits of the proposal and identified that the proposal was of a unique nature. The following are some of the unique characteristics of the proposal. CHEC, as a private investor, would arrange 100% funding to facilitate the development of the project without any government or FCJ guarantee or without any cash contribution from FCJ or the central government, thereby ensuring that the development of the project is undertaken by an experienced developer who will guarantee that the project will be completed within time and within budget. It allows FCJ, as an investor, to capitalize on the bilateral agreement between the Jamaican and Chinese governments, whereby funding, if available, may be secured at a concessionary interest rate to be provided by a Chinese financial institution. It allows FCJ, without any cash injection, to maximize its return on investment up to 70%, without which the project may not have been feasible to the GOJ. It is estimated that the planning and development cost of this project is approximately 8% of the overall construction cost, which means that Czech will be bringing over 800 million Jamaican dollars and 350 million Jamaican dollars of cash contribution to the project in the Nagohead Technology Park and the Morant Bay Urban Center, respectively. This contribution will be utilized to execute conceptual designs, master plans, detailed engineering designs, the feasibility plan, the hydrological study, and other studies necessary to ensure the effective execution of the project. This project, without being a joint venture, would be challenging to an investor putting up such large sums of funds to package the project to be presented to a financial institution for consideration of funding and fulfilling a specific requirement for the design concept. The board of directors of FCJ, acting through its investment committee, which was set up to review the unsolicited investment proposal of Czech, received the committee's recommendation to accept and approve the proposal from Czech. The board, in approving the unsolicited investment proposal, directed that the FCJ seek the advice and direction of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. In advising FCJ, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation directed the board of FCJ to engage professional consultancies, that is, a legal consultant and a financial analyst, to guide FCJ in the negotiation with China Harbour for the preparation of the joint venture agreement. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation also directed that the FCJ be guided by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the Attorney General's Chambers, the Public Investment Management Secretariat, PIMSEC, Jamaica Promotion Corporation, JAMPRO, and the Development Bank of Jamaica, DBJ, and which FCJ duly complied with. Extensive consultations over a period of 8 months was conducted with the above government agencies, and which ended in a submission to Cabinet by the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Subsequent to receiving Cabinet's approval for the two joint venture agreements, they were provided to Czech for final review. Czech has requested minor changes that are presently being reviewed by the FCJ board. And the last question is the process generally used by the FCJ to divest assets, whether by sale, lease, or joint ventures. And the process generally employed by the FCJ to divest its assets by way of sale or lease is contained in the Policy Framework and Procedures Manual for the Divestment of Government-Owned Lands, 2015, and FCJ's internal rental policy. And I believe we had submitted that document to the member from Central Manchester. And so those would be the answers to your questions. Do you want me to just read the supplementary answers, or you prefer to read them into the record?
No, I would prefer you to just continue, but since you didn't provide me with the answers, the written answers for the
they're here. I'm sorry. Remember, I'm sorry.
I got the first three, but the supplemental set, if you could just provide those.
You're together. So it's, yeah, those are together. Yes. So we'll send a supplemental to you. I'm sorry, member, I thought they were circulated. I had given them to the House Leader. So the supplementary questions asked what is the total area of rentable commercial building space for each project, and what is the total project development cost in each case? And the response, the Nagohead project, the total rentable building space is 810,000 square feet. A total project development cost is approximated at US $75 million. And the Morant Bay project, the total rentable building space is 365,000 square feet, and the estimated development cost is somewhere approximately US $49.8 million. What is the market value of the assets the FCJ is transferring to the joint venture company for its equity? The Nagohead project, the lands there are valued at $1.78 billion. And for the Morant Bay project, the land, in addition to other the costs for surveys and so forth, would be 800 million Jamaican dollars. So just to repeat, Nagohead is 1.78 billion and Morant Bay is $800 million. How much cash equity is CHEC putting in for its 30%? Note that if no other investors put in equity, CHEC will have majority control of the assets in both JVs. And the response, from previous responses, we can recall that the participants of the JV, that is a joint venture agreement, will be FCJ with 29% shareholding and CHEC with 30% shareholding, and any other investor who may take up 41% of the shareholding. It is quite unlikely that there will be no other investors coming in. The equity to be contributed by CHEC, as we said before, consists of actual costs and expenses to be incurred by CHEC for the provision of the detailed geotechnical and hydrological investigations, topographic surveys, the development of the master plan and the feasibility study, and all the design works. And those are significant to do for both projects. A cash contribution, if any, may be made by CHEC. So depending on whether or not the assessed cost of what they have put in falls short of their 30%, then they would be required to put in cash. They can also put in cash over and above their 30%, but that would be considered as a loan. And of course, we have reserved in this project, as we are doing with all our other projects, 41% for local investors to participate in, right? That is significant. So that will be done via an initial public offering, just as we're doing with Wigton, or we could very well take on institutional participants. You know, you could have NCB, you could have Proven, you could have all kinds coming in. So pension funds, obviously, but certainly in the initial construction stages to bridge until a pension fund actually sees something that they can invest in, you would have options open for local financiers. Which government facilities will be relocated to the Morant Bay project? And what area of commercial space will be required? And what is the rental rate agreed for this space? So for the Morant Bay project, the following government facilities will be relocated to the Morant Bay Urban Center. The St. Thomas Municipal Corporation, the St. Thomas Parish Court, the Tax Administration Revenue Center, Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency, PICA, and the National Insurance Fund. Discussions are ongoing with other government entities which may decide to be housed there. Well, not decide. The policy is once we develop a town center, we will be moving all the government agencies to the town center, quite like the concept of the government circle. So we are using government as the anchor to spark the regeneration of our urban spaces. So the Morant Bay project, it is expected that the total commercial space that will be assigned to house all government facilities is approximately 40% of the total space. And the rest will be available for rental, sale, or lease. The rentable rate for the Morant Bay space, I would consider this indicative because we don't have the space yet. We're talking 2 years to go. But projected indicative would be somewhere in the region of US $6 to US $9 per square foot, and for commercial space. And in terms of BPO space, you'd be looking at somewhere between $12 and $21. But again, I wouldn't take these as set figures because it's really very speculative at this early stage. And for Nagahead, none of the rentable commercial space will house any government facilities. This will be strictly a BPO operation. Background music. Will these PPPs comply with the Swiss challenge system required by the GOJ policy and institutional framework for the implementation of PPPs? Specifically, the statement therein at 9.0.3.2 that states unsolicited proposals for projects which are not on the PPP list will always be competitively procured via the Swiss challenge system. If not, how will we guarantee value for money? There are several issues with this question, but I will give you my written response, and then afterwards we'll explore. The financing model was not a public-private partnership. Instead, a joint venture agreement was utilized to create a special purpose vehicle that allows equity investment by Czech and FCJ and any other investor by way of an initial public offering. The project company, that is a special purpose vehicle, is expected to utilize an independent, reputable assessor to develop the project development cost, that is the bill of quantities. This developmental cost will be the basis of the construction agreement signed between the project company and Czech. Those are my answers.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And before I even begin asking my follow-up questions, let me thank you for putting quite a lot of information. And you and I have been communicating privately on some of these issues. And so you know that these questions are not asked in any gotcha kind of way. I'm really trying to use Parliament to help formulate better policies and that we learn from our experience as we go along. And some of the learning, you know, I've raised concerns about some of the previous agreements, not just made by your government, made by our government as well, and that based on our experience, we need to keep adjusting and fine-tuning and negotiating better. And I see some of that reflected here. I see, for example, an increased guaranteed percentage of the workforce for Jamaicans. Previously, I believe it was 50%, and now it's at a minimum of 80%, which is a good thing. And I think the country can benefit from us seeing where we can continue to sharpen our negotiating skills, and particularly as our fiscal situation improves. Our relative negotiating strength also improves because China Exim or China Development Bank no longer becomes the only game in town for these sorts of large projects. So let me just say that there's really three things that I'm concerned that we get right, or we improve on each round of these type of projects that we do. The first one, my first concern is to do with the fairness to our local contractors, our local professionals, and our local construction tradesmen, skilled and also, of course, unskilled workers. The size of the packages are substantial. And a $75 million investment by itself is going to exclude most local investors, certainly any one individual investor or joint venture partner. However, I've raised the point before, and I see an accommodation is now made to allow additional investors, whether the Sagicors, the life insurance companies, the pension funds, the NIS, the long-term investors. And Prime Minister, I can tell you from wearing another hat, pension funds are looking for good investments, because as the flip side of our success in bringing down interest rates is that government paper is not even yielding real returns in some instances, yielding returns below inflation, which is a good thing for taxpayers, but a bad thing for pensioners who have their pension funds invested largely in government paper. So we need to diversify these investments, and opportunities need to be provided. Opportunities, hopefully like these, as they mature, maybe not at the seed phase, at the ground level, but at mezzanine levels, we should try and include as many of our local pension funds as possible as investors, but also if we can design the projects so that they have packages that local construction firms and professionals can participate at a level as well. The second concern is to do, and you mentioned that this policy and institutional framework for PPP doesn't apply in this case. And I accept that, but I think the principles which it speaks to, and two in particular, we should, whether the project falls under this directly or not, we should try and observe. And the first one is achieving value for money for the public. And the second is maintaining probity and transparency. Because whether there is anything illegitimate or not, we want as much transparency as possible. The massive projects, the government may only be providing, in some cases, 800 million of value, 1.7, but it's still a lot of money, of taxpayers' money. And I think we have an obligation to ensure that we get value for money and that whatever we do is transparent. And I raise particularly the value for money case. I mean, only you would have been aware, Prime Minister, you were in the States last week. I'm sure you read the New York Times while you were there. And you would have seen the case in Malaysia of the East Coast Rail Link, where when the new government came in, they renegotiated this project with China Communications Construction Company, which is the parent company for China Harbor. And they were able to reduce the project cost by $5.3 billion, 1/3 of the total project cost. And even though there were some variations, even when it goes down to a per mile, they've still reduced it by 1/3 per mile of railway cost. So we can't just assume that the prices that you negotiate on a first blush will be the best. Really, competitive tendering is what has traditionally given us the best cost, and as the further away we go from that, the less guaranteed we are of ensuring that we get value for money. But to the extent that most of the money will be at the risk of the project or of China Harbor and not of the shareholders, other than what we have, the couple 2 to 3 billion that we would have put in as equity, then that, the incentive for, or put it this way, the due diligence for value for money becomes more on the other partner than it is on us. So I acknowledge that I think we are learning, and that the discussions that we have here don't have to be quarrelsome. I think as we get more experience, we will become stronger negotiators, and some of that is being reflected, I believe, in what we see here. But the other point, the other principle of transparency is the one I think we still could do a little better on. We heard last week, I think it was, where we saw a release and some pictures of the Minister of Foreign Affairs signing on to the Belt and Road Initiative, which was deepening the economic relationship, it said, in the brief caption I saw of the picture. But we really got no details of what new commitments have been made, or what new agreements have been made. And I think something like that, Prime Minister, there should be a ministry paper tabled in this House or in the upper House, laying out for the country exactly what the implications of that are. I think given that these are such huge projects in the context of Jamaica, maybe not huge in the context of Malaysia or these much larger economies, but huge for Jamaica, I similarly think some project documents could have been shared without us having to elicit through parliamentary questions the details of it. And I'm not quarreling, I'm just making that as a suggestion and saying huge projects like this that are not going through a competitive procurement process that would have the normal documentation in the public domain, it would be helpful. And I'm asking you if you'll be willing going forward to table these, whether by way of ministry paper or posting it on a agency website, etc., so that the public can be confident and be fully informed, not just those of us here in Parliament, that whatever is taking place is transparent, gives a fair deal to our local participants in the construction sector, and ensures, or as best as possible, ensures value for money for taxpayers. Thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, the member did not ask a question, but gave extensive comments, which I interpret to be asking either my concurrence with certain suggestions. So, as it relates to transparency, the Cabinet passed this joint... Oh, you want it? The Cabinet passed this joint venture. I explained it in my previous budget presentation, what this is that we're going to do. FCJ is still a public company. The documents are still public. Granted, you have, by virtue of your question, would have elicited my own explanation in this forum. The board of the joint venture company in the initial construction phase will be chaired by a representative from FCJ. So there will still be some government, I can't say control, but exercise of control of the construction process, and thereby there would still be ways to get information by virtue of that structure. So we will have representation on the board. The intention of doing it that way is to also ensure that if it becomes a listed company on the stock exchange, then there would be certain reporting requirements that the company would have to do. And that is why we are encouraging to have the company listed, so that there would be transparency. we are, as a government, very cognizant. My personal view is that the government should minimize the number of joint venture agreements it has. Joint venture agreements, if not properly structured, can create problems for the government. And we can look at the list, Mr. Speaker, of all the joint venture agreements that we have had, and there are very few of them that we can say have been successful. I can say for this agreement, as the member was saying, we have made sure to put in every clause that we could find to protect the government's interest. But I can't here stand and say it is a guarantee for success. But I think with this joint venture agreement, we have a better chance than we have had before with any other joint venture that these two projects will be successful. And we can look at the JVs going from the joint venture agreement to operate Petrojan, from CAP, from many of the housing joint venture agreements that we have had. We've just not had success. So the member's point is valid that there is, we have paid an expensive price for the experience that we have, and therefore we must use it. And I think this joint venture reflects us using the bad experiences to create a good framework going forward. Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's anything more to say other than what I've said now.
Warming. As one of the members of Parliament in St. Thomas, Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, I believe that this project is too big to fail. And we are anxious, sure I'm speaking on behalf of Jim, to see it started. My concern, however, there are some environmental concerns relative to the site being one of the terms of aquifer. It is sitting on almost the best we have in the parish. And therefore, while that can be corrected by the technical people, I just want to be assured that in going forward, we are taking all of these considerations. The aquifer, there is a view about sea level rise and getting infiltration of salt water on the present site. I want to raise it for the records. And there is also the question of the site being in a floodplain, and therefore it requires significant groundwork to the north of the Bustamante Bridge going up. And I'm sure that these are considerations that will be taken into account early, so that when we are way down the wicket, we are not having any issues. I think this project, along with the Southern Coastal Highway and the master plan for tourism combined, is what St. Thomas needs at this time, and we're looking forward to it.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister. Just a minute. Mr. Hilton. Let me say that just listening to the terms of the agreement, I would have to agree that this is an effort to minimize the risks in these kinds of situations, and I want to acknowledge, just listening, that I think this effort is likely to yield some important and new approaches to the joint venture arrangement. On the particular project, though, I just wanted to ask what has happened to the previous contractual arrangement, because this project, as you know, started at least in a form. I don't know if it has been rescoped. But it started in the previous administration. When I had some responsibilities. When I had some responsibilities, And the project was about, in fact, my recollection is that we would have broken ground at some point. However, that did not occur. The issue, I don't know, I mean, how have we managed to, if at all? Well, I'm sure because the contractor was identified and negotiated with. But I'm assuming that that has been addressed in ways that we're not likely to hear any kind of challenges that might affect the project itself in its implementation.
Remember, you were the minister that would have brought to cabinet a submission that would have seen a joint venture agreement with a contractor on a specific term, which would see to the development of about 120,000 square feet, that the contractor would operate the facility for 20 years, that you would get somewhere in the region of about 1% of the value of the investment in shares, I believe. But you wouldn't get any flows for 20 years. But they would build and operate, but you would be responsible for the maintenance. I think when we looked at that and compared it with taking the project from an enterprise level, which would be bringing both projects together, securing the necessary financing, and develop the project all at once instead of incrementally, I think that this would be a superior offer than what was there before. I just want to say, you know, Jamaica has to get used to developments of these size and larger. I mean, what we are used to will not get us the growth that we need. We have the capacity. The member mentioned that our pension funds are now looking for investments as a result of good fiscal policy, bringing down interest rates and weaning the dependency on government paper. But now government has to play a critical role, and that role is of developer, promoter, and market maker. And that is why we are taking a stake in this development through a joint venture, because we have to play that development role. So government has to bring more assets to market, right, and to productive use, so that the pension funds, who, if they can't find, and the insurance companies and the banks, that if they can't find investments of these nature, then, you know, some of them might be looking at hedging in foreign currencies or you know. So we are very proactive, and that is what is driving us now in getting unutilized, underutilized assets to market and into productive uses. And whatever we can do, whatever we have control over, there will be a portion of it available to the private equity markets, to the stock markets, or to the private financiers to participate and play a role. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
One final question, Prime Minister. Just my colleague.
Member, no, I mean, what you have said there is, you know, I've been paying attention to that. They have done, the FCJ, they have done an EIA, and I'm sure that those issues will be raised. What I would undertake to do, member, is as soon as I'm done here today, the members are here, I will have a conversation. In fact, why not join us and let us have a discussion about it?
I gather there were some wells on that property, Prime Minister, that we might want to reserve some of that water for more general use. But the final question was, there's some good minimum level of local employment. I just want to know what mechanisms are in place to monitor these to ensure compliance during the life of the project. Because it's one thing to put it in the agreement, but if there is no monitoring mechanism, and you know, I heard allegations, I'm not going any more than that, to say, for example, that on previous projects where there was a 50% guarantee, what you would happen is Jamaicans would be taken on a rotating basis. So they might come on for a fortnight or two, and then another set come on. And when you look at it over time, you'd have many names of Jamaicans who had worked there. But in terms of the man months or man years for the life of the project, it really didn't represent. So my final question is just to ask if there is such a monitoring mechanism in place for the life of the construction, and what other arrangements are being made for enforcement and to ensure that the system is not gamed. Because one of the complaints that we've heard is that there's a large number of Chinese workers on the site doing jobs that don't appear to require imported skills. And while unemployment has improved, we still have a lot of people looking for jobs locally.
Which is why I mentioned earlier that during the construction phase, the board will be chaired by a representative from FCJ. So FCJ will have the primary responsibility, the direct responsibility of supervising the terms of the joint venture agreement. But note, the FCJ is one of the prime agencies in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And the FCJ is one of the agencies that I pay direct attention to. So I give you my own commitment to be directly supervising and making sure that what is done is in keeping with our JV. No, but that is one I do supervise.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I invite you to adjourn this Honourable House until next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, next Tuesday, April the 30th, and I am going to appeal to every member here. Let us start on time, because the way we are going, we can actually get through before 6 o'clock as today, but we could have gotten through before 5:30. So let's pick up the pace and get the work of the business done efficiently and on time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until next week, Tuesday, at 2 o'clock. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? As have it. This Honourable House now stands adjourned.
I am an infantry soldier.